You want to shut us down. Big Jim Caulfield's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It filled the room like thunder before a storm, slow, inevitable, impossible to ignore. A 6-year-old girl is dying, Sheriff. And you're standing here talking to me about permits. Sheriff Blake Whitmore straightened his collar and smiled the smile of a man who had never once been told no. I'm talking about the law, Mr. Caulfield. And the law says your event is canceled. That was the moment everything changed in Oak Haven, California. Not with a gunshot, not with a fist, with a smile and the quiet fury of men who had learned long ago that the most dangerous thing in the world isn't a weapon. It's a principle. If you're watching this story for the first time, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from and stay with me until the very end. Because what happened next in this town will remind you that justice doesn't always arrive in a uniform. Sometimes it rides in leather. The diner on Sycamore Street had seen better days. The vinyl booths were cracked along the seams, the overhead fans wobbled with every rotation, and the coffee was strong enough to dissolve doubt, which was exactly why Carol Danvers had worked there for 11 years without complaint. She needed the tips. She needed the hours. And for the past 8 months, more than anything else in the world, she needed a miracle. Lily was 6 years old and weighed 41 pounds. She had her mother's dark eyes and her late father's gap-toothed smile, and she had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune liver condition called biliary atresia, a disease that had been quietly dismantling her body since before she could read her own name. The specialists in Sacramento had laid out the situation with the kind of clinical detachment that doctors use when they have given the same speech too many times without a targeted immunological treatment procedure. Available only through a research program in Seattle, Lily would not see her 7th birthday. The cost was $250,000. Carol had $6,300 in savings, a car with 200,000 miles on it, and a landlord who was already 3 months behind on patients. She didn't tell the regulars at first. She kept refilling coffees and clearing plates and saying, "Have a good one," with the same tired warmth she'd carried for a decade. But grief has a way of leaking through even the tightest composure, and Marisol, the cook, who had worked beside her for 6 years, noticed the way Carol kept her phone face down on the counter, the way she flinched every time it buzzed, the way her hands had started trembling slightly by mid-afternoon. "You sleeping?" Marisol asked one Thursday morning before the breakfast rush. Carol shook her head and poured herself a cup of coffee she wouldn't drink. Lily had a rough night. Marisol didn't push. She never pushed. But she listened and she remembered. And 3 days later, she told her cousin Des about the situation. And Des told his buddy Hector, and Hector was a man who spent his Saturday mornings at the Hells Angels Oak Haven chapter clubhouse on Route 7, tinkering with carburetors and talking about everything and nothing with the kind of men most people cross the street to avoid. That was how Big Jim Caulfield heard about Lily Danvers. James Caulfield had been the chapter president for 14 years. He was 53 years old, built like a man who had once done hard labor and hadn't quite stopped, with gray hair cut short and arms covered in ink that told the story of a life lived without apology. He had buried 2 friends, raised 2 daughters, and served 4 years in the Army before coming back to Oak Haven and finding that the town had changed faster than he'd expected and that the roads at night were quieter when you rode them with brothers who understood. He was not a sentimental man, but he had a daughter named Grace who was 1 year older than Lily, and when Hector told the story over the sound of a ratchet wrench and the distant bark of someone's dog, Jim set the wrench down and didn't pick it back up for a long time. "Who's her mother?" he asked. "Woman named Carol, works at the diner on Sycamore. She asking for help?" "No," Hector said. "That's the thing. She's not asking anybody for anything. She's just trying to hold it together." Jim looked at the wall. There was a map of California pinned there with red tacks marking every charity ride the chapter had done in the past decade, fundraisers for burn victims, for veterans, for a family in Fresno whose house burned down the week before Christmas. 46 red tacks over 14 years. 46 reasons he could point to when people asked him what the club actually stood for. He didn't say anything dramatic. He didn't make a speech. He just picked up his coffee, took a long drink, and said, "Set up a meeting, all hands." That Tuesday evening, 23 members of the Oak Haven Hells Angels chapter sat around the long table in the back room of the clubhouse and listened as Jim laid out what he knew. He told them about Lily. He told them about the $250,000. He told them about Carol working doubles at the diner while her daughter slept in the room next door, too exhausted most nights to lift a glass of water without help. No one interrupted. That alone said something. When Jim finished, a man named Darnell, road name, Dice 12-year member, former wildland firefighter, leaned back in his chair and said, "So what are we thinking, plate drive auction?" "Bigger," Jim said. "We do a full charity run, Highway 9 to the county fairgrounds. We reach out to every friendly chapter within 300 miles. We get vendors, we get music, we get media coverage. We do this right, and we can raise $250,000 in one day." The room was quiet for a moment. Then a younger member named Trey said, "That's ambitious." "The situation calls for it," Jim said. He looked around the table. All in favor. Every hand went up. The planning began the next morning. Over the following 3 weeks, the Oak Haven chapter operated with a focus and discipline that surprised even their most seasoned members. Jim assigned roles with the efficiency of a man who had once coordinated supply logistics under fire. Dice handled outreach to allied chapters, a quiet giant named Richie Roadblock. Torres managed vendor coordination, and a retired paralegal named Marcus Webb. Books. The chapter's unofficial legal mind handled all the paperwork for the charity permit, the road closure applications, and the liability framework. They were meticulous. Every document filed correctly, every form submitted on time, every phone call logged. Jim had insisted on it from the start. "We do this clean," he told Marcus on the second day of planning. "Every I dotted, every T crossed. I want this so airtight that nobody can find a single angle to push on." Marcus looked up from his laptop. "You expecting trouble?" Jim considered the question. Outside the clubhouse window, Route 7 stretched quiet and sun-bleached toward the edge of town. "I'm always expecting trouble," he said. "I just prefer to be the only one ready for it." The permit application was filed with the county on a Monday. By Wednesday, confirmations had come in from 14 allied chapters across the state riders, from Bakersfield, Modesto, Stockton, Sacramento, even a contingent from the Bay Area who'd heard about the cause through a network of riders that communicated faster than most newsrooms. 340 riders confirmed within the first 10 days. By the end of week 2, the number had climbed past 400. The Angels Run, as they named it, was shaping up to be the largest charity motorcycle event Oak Haven had ever seen. That was when Sheriff Blake Whitmore started paying attention. Blake Whitmore was 41 years old with the kind of square jaw and carefully maintained haircut that looked good on a campaign poster, which was not a coincidence because campaign posters were very much on his mind. He had been sheriff of Oak Haven County for 3 years, having won the seat on a law and order platform that leaned heavily on a promise to clean up the highways and restore community safety, a campaign slogan that had always been slightly more coded than it appeared. He was ambitious in the particular way of men who believe they deserve more than they have. The state Senate seat being vacated in November represented the next step in a career he had been planning since his second year of law school, and every decision he made now was filtered through the question of how it would play with voters in the greater county district, a district that skewed conservative, older, and deeply suspicious of anything that didn't conform to a certain idea of what respectable looked like. When the flyers for the Angels Run started appearing around town on the bulletin board at the hardware store in the window of the feed shop stapled to the telephone poles along Route 7, Whitmore pulled one down himself and read it twice in the front seat of his cruiser. He made a phone call that afternoon to his chief deputy, a heavy-set man named Garland Pruitt, who had been with the department for 18 years and who understood, without being told, which direction the wind was blowing. "Tell me about this motorcycle thing," Whitmore said. Garland told him. The charity run, the little girl, the 400 riders, the confirmed permits. There was a silence on the line. Then Whitmore said, "I want options." "Options for what, Sheriff?" Another silence. "Options for addressing public safety concerns." Garland was quiet for a moment. He had been a deputy long enough to know that public safety concerns meant something specific. When the sheriff used that particular tone of voice, it meant find me a reason. "The paperwork's all in order," he said carefully. "Books Webb filed everything clean. Believe me, I looked." "Look harder," Whitmore said. And hung up. But Garland couldn't find anything wrong with the paperwork because there was nothing wrong with it. Marcus Webb had spent 16 years as a paralegal before joining the chapter, and he had built the permit application like a fortress, cross-referenced, pre-approved at every level, buttressed with letters of support from 3 county supervisors and a signed noise ordinance waiver from every property owner along the proposed route. When Garland reported this back, Whitmore didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He simply said, "Schedule me a press conference for Thursday morning." The press conference happened on the steps of the county courthouse. Whitmore wore his dress uniform and stood at the podium with the practiced ease of a man who had spent considerable time in front of mirrors. The local papers sent a reporter. The regional television affiliate sent a camera crew. And Whitmore delivered what he had clearly been preparing for days. He talked about public safety. He talked about the unpredictability of large motorcycle gatherings. He cited without specifics intelligence concerns about the character of some of the participating organizations. He used the word outlaw twice and criminal enterprise once, and he let the implications hang in the air without attaching them to anything specific enough to be challenged. "The safety of the people of Oak Haven County is my first and only responsibility," he said, looking directly into the camera with the earnest gaze of a man who had rehearsed it. "And until we can be certain that this event poses no threat to our community, I am exercising my authority to place the charity permit under administrative review." Administrative review, not revoked, not canceled, just paused, indefinitely. The reporter from the local paper, a young woman named Darcy Cho, who had been covering Oak Haven for 2 years and had developed a finely tuned instinct for bureaucratic misdirection, raised her hand immediately. "Sheriff, the event is scheduled for 12 days from now. What's the timeline on this review?" Whitmore smiled. "We'll move as quickly as the situation allows. Can you specify what triggered the review? What intelligence concerns? I'm not in a position to discuss an ongoing review in detail. Is there any specific criminal activity associated with the organizers? I'm not making specific allegations at this time." Darcy wrote every non-answer down in her notebook with the patience of someone who intended to use them later. When Jim heard about the press conference, Dice called him while he was eating lunch at the kitchen table. He didn't slam his fork down. He didn't curse. He set the phone on the table, finished his sandwich, and then drove to Marcus's apartment and knocked on the door. Marcus answered in a bathrobe, coffee in hand, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. "I saw it," he said before Jim could speak. "Administrative review," Jim said. "Stall tactic. He can't actually revoke it. The paperwork's clean, and the county supervisors are already on record supporting it. He's hoping we'll either react badly and give him a real reason, or that we'll fold from the pressure and cancel it ourselves." Jim leaned against the doorframe. "So what do? "We do nothing," Marcus said. "We keep planning. We keep communicating through proper channels. We document everything, every phone call, every letter, every statement he makes. We build a paper trail. And if he actually revokes the permit," Marcus sipped his coffee, "then we file in federal court that same afternoon. I've already drafted the paperwork." He paused. "Jim, I've been waiting for him to do something like this since the day he got elected. You know something about him." Marcus was quiet for a moment in a way that told Jim the answer was yes. "I know the kind of man he is," he finally said. "And I know that kind of man almost always has something worth finding if you know where to look." Jim looked at him for a long moment. "Start looking." Marcus nodded slowly. "Already did." The next 3 days were a masterclass in controlled tension. Whitmore held the permit in administrative limbo. Jim continued planning the run as if the permit were fully intact because legally it still was. He held a coordination meeting with the chapter presidents from 6 allied groups who had driven down to Oak Haven specifically to assess the situation. They sat around the long table and listened as Jim explained the sheriff's move. A woman named Sandra Reeves, president of a Northern California women's riding group that had been operating charity events for 15 years, leaned forward and asked, "You think he's going to follow through?" "I think he's going to try," Jim said. "What's his angle political?" "He's running for state senate. He wants footage of himself standing down a biker gang. He wants the clip." Sandra made a sound in the back of her throat that wasn't quite a laugh. "So we're props." "He thinks we are," Jim said. "That's his first mistake." A heavy-set chapter president from Bakersfield named Gerald Gear Hoffman crossed his arms and said, "What's our play if he actually shuts it down?" "Legal," Jim said immediately. "Nothing else. We don't give him a single frame of footage he can use. We don't raise our voices. We don't show up with anything that looks like a threat. We ride clean or we don't ride." There were murmurs around the table, not of disagreement, of respect. These were men and women who had seen what happened when emotion overtook strategy, and they recognized the discipline in Jim's approach. "And the girl?" Sandra asked quietly. Jim looked at her. "Lily Danvers, 6 years old. The Seattle treatment program has a slot open in 8 weeks. If we miss that window..." He stopped. "We're not missing that window." The room got very quiet. It was Gear who broke the silence. "Tell us what you need." What happened next surprised even Jim. Word of the permit hold had leaked. Darcy Cho published a tight, fact-based piece in the local paper that laid out the timeline without editorializing, and within 24 hours it had been picked up by 2 regional outlets. By the following morning, Carol Danvers' phone, which she had barely been using because she couldn't afford to run down the battery, started ringing with calls from people she had never met. A teacher from Modesto, who had read the article online, sent a $200 Venmo transfer with the message, "Stay strong." A retired firefighter from Sacramento called the diner directly and asked how he could help. A local church congregation that had nothing to do with motorcycles announced a bake sale fundraiser specifically designated for Lily's treatment fund. Carol stood behind the counter at the diner holding a coffee pot she had forgotten to pour and tried very hard not to cry in front of the Tuesday morning regulars. She almost succeeded. Marisol came out of the kitchen, took the coffee pot gently from Carol's hand, and said, "Go sit down. 5 minutes." Carol shook her head. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Sit down." Carol sat. Marisol poured her a cup of coffee, actual coffee, hot in a real mug, not the to-go cup she usually grabbed between rushes, and sat across from her in the booth for 3 minutes before either of them said anything. "I didn't ask them to do this," Carol said finally. "I know. I've never even talked to any of those men. The biker group. I've never..." She stopped. "Lily's never even seen a motorcycle up close." Marisol nodded. "Why are they doing this?" Carol asked, and the question came out with a rawness that had nothing to do with doubt and everything to do with being a person who had been alone with an impossible problem for so long that the appearance of help felt almost more frightening than the problem itself. Marisol thought about it for a moment. "Because somebody told them the story," she said, "and they decided it mattered." Carol looked down at her coffee, "And the sheriff is trying to stop it." "Yeah. Why?" Marisol shrugged with the world-weariness of a woman who had seen enough of how power worked to not be surprised by any particular expression of it. "Because it makes him look small. Men like that can't stand looking small." At the county courthouse 7 blocks away, Sheriff Blake Whitmore was on the phone with his campaign consultant, a sharp-voiced man from Sacramento named Paul Renner, who specialized in helping ambitious local politicians navigate the gap between who they were and who they wanted voters to think they were. "The story's getting out," Renner said. "The girl, the bikers, the permit hold. It's starting to get a sympathetic frame." "Then we change the frame," Whitmore said. "How?" "We escalate." Whitmore leaned back in his chair. "If I back down now, I look weak. If I hold the line on public safety grounds, I look principled." "Blake," Renner's voice sharpened, "the child is 6 years old. I'm aware. And you're the thing standing between her and the money that saves her life. That's the story people are reading right now." "Then we change what story they're reading," Whitmore said again with the patience of a man who had made up his mind before the conversation started. "Schedule me another press conference. I want to talk about organized crime gang activity and the danger of normalizing criminal enterprises under the guise of charity. I want to change the conversation." There was a long pause on Renner's end. "I need you to think carefully about this." "I have thought carefully about it. If this goes wrong, it won't." Another silence. Then Renner said in the voice of a man who has decided to let a client make their own mistake, "Okay, Thursday morning, same location. I'll set it up." "Good." Whitmore straightened a framed photo on his desk himself, shaking hands with a state senator at a Republican fundraiser 2 years ago. He looked at it for a moment. "Paul, how many rallies do we have lined up for next month?" 7, 8 if the Riverside event confirms." "Good," Whitmore said again. He was already thinking past this. He was already 3 steps ahead in a game he was very confident he was winning. "Let's talk about messaging." He did not know, could not have known that 14 miles away in the mall back office of an apartment on Fuller Street, Marcus Webb was sitting at his desk, with 3 separate laptop windows open, a yellow legal pad covered in handwritten notes beside him, and a look on his face that Marcus Webb very rarely wore. The look of a man who has found exactly what he was looking for. Marcus had spent 16 years as a paralegal before joining the chapter. In those 16 years, he had developed a particular skill, the skill of following money through the bureaucratic and legal channels where it liked to hide through LLCs and shell companies, through asset forfeiture records and county budget filings, through the kind of financial paperwork that most people's eyes slid right over because it was aggressively boring by design. It had taken him 4 days to find the first thread. A seized asset, a commercial property on Route 12 that had been confiscated during a drug investigation 3 years ago that had never appeared in the county's public asset registry. It had instead transferred through a chain of 3 LLCs to a property management company registered in Nevada under a name Marcus didn't recognize at first. He recognized it on the second pass. It was the maiden name of Whitmore's mother-in-law. Marcus sat very still for a long moment. Then he opened a new document and started typing. He didn't call Jim that night. He needed more. One thread wasn't enough, not enough to take to anyone, not enough to use, not enough to be certain. He needed the pattern, not just the anomaly. He kept digging. By Thursday morning, the morning of Whitmore's second press conference, Marcus had been awake for 31 hours and had assembled the outlines of something considerably larger than a single missing property. There were 6 seized assets he couldn't account for. There were 2 campaign finance filings that didn't add up when cross-referenced against the public donation records. There was a county contractor who had received 3 consecutive no-bid contracts in the past 2 years, and whose principal investor was a man with known connections to one of Whitmore's major donors. It was not by itself a complete picture, but it was enough to know that a complete picture existed and that it was very ugly. He called Jim at 6:30 in the morning. Jim answered on the second ring. "Tell me." "Not on the phone," Marcus said. "Come to my place." Jim was there in 20 minutes. He sat across from Marcus at the kitchen table and listened without interrupting as Marcus walked him through what he'd found: the properties, the LLCs, the contracts, the campaign finance discrepancies. Marcus talked for 22 minutes without stopping. When he finished, Jim was quiet. "Is it solid?" Jim asked. "The outline is solid. The full picture needs a forensic accountant and probably a federal database search. But what I've found is enough to know we're not looking at minor irregularities, Jim. We're looking at a systematic pattern of using law enforcement authority, specifically asset forfeiture, to enrich a private network of people connected to Whitmore." Jim looked at the legal pad on the table. "How long has this been going on?" "Based on what I can document, at least 2 years, possibly longer." "Before he was running for Senate?" "Yes." Jim leaned back in his chair. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the kitchen window, the morning was bright and still. "He's been doing this the whole time," he said. It wasn't a question. "It looks that way. And he pulls our permit to protect his image." Jim's voice didn't rise. It got quieter, actually, which was a thing Marcus had learned to pay attention to over the years. "While a 6-year-old girl is running out of time." Marcus said nothing. "What do we do with this?" Jim asked. "That depends on what you want," Marcus said carefully. "If you want to use it as leverage to get the permit back, that's one path. But it's a dangerous path. It's closer to blackmail than we want to be." "That's not what I want," Jim said immediately. "I know. So the other path is we build the full picture, get a forensic accountant and cross-reference everything I've found, make sure every number is verified, and then we hand the whole package to federal authorities." "How long does that take?" Marcus looked at his legal pad. "To do it right, 3 weeks minimum." Jim looked at him. "The run is in 12 days. "I know. And if he revokes the permit before then we fight it in court, and we win because the paperwork is clean, and the revocation would be arbitrary. But that takes time we don't have." They sat with that for a moment. The complexity of it, the ticking clock of Lily's treatment window, the weight of having a weapon and knowing that using it too early or too clumsily could damage everything. "Keep building the file," Jim said finally. "Don't cut corners. I want every number verified, every document sourced. We do this right or we don't do it." He pushed his chair back. "And I'm going to go have a conversation with the sheriff." Marcus looked up sharply. "Jim." "Calm conversation," Jim said. "Official channels. I'm going to request a meeting to discuss the permit review. Formal, documented, recorded if he'll allow it. He stood up. I want to look him in the eye. Marcus held his gaze for a moment. Then, don't give him anything. I won't. And don't let him make you angry. Jim looked at him with an expression that was almost but not quite a smile. Has that ever worked on me? The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon. Jim arrived alone in clean clothes, no cuts, no patches, no leather, and sat across the desk from Sheriff Blake Whitmore in the county administration building with his hands folded on the table like a man who had nowhere else he needed to be. Whitmore had brought Garland Pruitt with him, which told Jim something. Men who were confident didn't bring witnesses to meetings like this. Men who were nervous did. Mr. Caulfield, Whitmore said, settling into his chair with the practiced ease of a man performing confidence. I appreciate you coming in. Of course, Jim said. I'm sure you understand that my office has genuine public safety concerns about an event of this scale. With respect, Sheriff, Jim said pleasantly. I've read the relevant statutes. An administrative review of a properly filed permit and requires documented cause. Our legal counsel would like to understand what specific cause has been documented. Whitmore's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted almost imperceptibly. The review is ongoing. I understand. I'm asking about the basis for the review. Public safety is a broad mandate, Mr. Caulfield. It is, Jim. Agreed. It's also a specific legal standard. Broad mandates don't satisfy that standard. Garland shifted in his chair. Whitmore laced his fingers together. We have intelligence suggesting that some of the participating organizations present a security risk. I'd like to see that intelligence in writing, Jim said. Specifically, the threat assessments attached to each organization. Our legal team will want to respond to any specific concerns. Another pause. That's not something I'm able to share at this stage. Jim nodded slowly as if this were a reasonable answer he was carefully considering. Sheriff, he said, there is a 6-year-old girl in this county who needs $250,000 for a medical procedure that will save her life. We have 400 riders committed to raising that money through a legal, permitted, peaceful event. I want to understand what it is specifically that your office believes should stand in the way of that. The room was very quiet. Whitmore looked at Jim with an expression that was trying hard to be authoritative and landing somewhere closer to calculating. I'm concerned about the organizations involved, he said, the associations, the reputation. The reputation, Jim repeated. Yes. The reputation of the people trying to save a child's life. Whitmore didn't answer. Jim stood. Thank you for your time, Sheriff. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. We'll continue planning the event in good faith. If your office decides to issue a formal revocation, we'll respond through appropriate legal channels. He looked at Whitmore for one long moment. I hope that doesn't become necessary, for everyone's sake. He walked out of the office without looking back. In the parking lot, he sat in his truck for a moment and let the quiet settle around him. Then he called Marcus. How are we on the file? He asked. I found 2 more accounts, Marcus said. I think I need to bring in someone with federal database access. Jim thought for a moment. You know anyone at the FBI field office? I know someone who knows someone. It's not a direct line. Make the call, Jim said. And Marcus. He paused. Move faster. That evening, Jim drove to the diner on Sycamore Street for the first time. He went alone late in the afternoon before the dinner rush and sat at the counter and ordered a coffee and a slice of pie he didn't particularly want. Carol recognized him almost immediately. His picture had been in the paper, and there was something about the way he occupied a space that made him hard to mistake for anyone else. She came to refill his coffee after a few minutes and said without preamble, You're the one organizing the run. Yes, ma'am. She looked at him for a moment. Carol Danvers was 42 years old and had the kind of face that showed everything it had been through, not as damage but as evidence. Evidence of someone who had kept going when keeping going was the only option available. Why, she asked. Jim wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. Because someone told us about Lily, he said, and we decided it mattered. Carol blinked, looked down, looked back up. The sheriff's trying to stop you. He's trying. He might succeed. He might, Jim said, but we're not planning around that possibility. Carol was quiet for a moment. She asked me this morning, she said. Lily asked me if the motorcycle men were really going to help. Her voice stayed steady, which cost her something visible. I didn't know what to tell her. Jim looked at her directly. Tell her yes, he said. Carol held his gaze. Something passed between them, not sentiment exactly, but something solider than sentiment. Recognition. The understanding of two people who were both in different ways refusing to accept a story that ended badly. Okay, she said quietly. And then she refilled his coffee and moved down the counter, and Jim sat in the quiet of the diner and thought about everything that was still in motion. The file Marcus was building, the 400 writers waiting for a word, the permit hanging in bureaucratic limbo, and decided not for the first time and not for the last that the only thing to do was the next right thing. Outside, the sun was going down over Oak Haven. The diner's neon sign buzzed softly in the window. And somewhere across town in a county administration building that smelled of carpet cleaner and ambition, Sheriff Blake Whitmore was preparing a statement that would within 72 hours change the shape of everything. He thought he was making a move. He didn't know he was making a mistake. The formal revocation notice arrived on a Monday morning, hand-delivered by Deputy Garland Pruitt to the chapter's registered legal address, a P.O. box on Main Street. Marcus signed for it. He read the document standing on the sidewalk outside the post office, his reading glasses perched on his nose and his jaw slowly tightening. He called Jim before he'd walk back to his car. He did it, Marcus said. Jim was silent for 3 seconds. How does it read? Vague. Public safety and community welfare concerns. No specifics, no documented threat assessment. A pause. He wrote it himself. The language is too clean to be a lawyer's draft, but the legal citations are wrong. He cited the wrong subsection of the county ordinance. Meaning he's overreached, meaning the revocation is probably invalid on its face. Another pause. Meaning we can file in federal court today. File it, Jim said. File it this afternoon. Already printing the paperwork, Marcus said. And the federal contact the FBI thing. I made the call. I'm waiting to hear back. Marcus paused. Jim, the file I'm building, it's getting bigger. How much bigger? The silence that followed that question lasted long enough that Jim knew the answer before Marcus gave it. Bigger than one sheriff, Marcus said. I think this goes up. Jim stood with that for a moment. The morning light came through his kitchen window at a sharp angle. His coffee was going cold on the counter. 400 riders were waiting for a decision he hadn't made yet. Keep going, he said. Keep building it. He hung up and looked at his cold coffee for a moment. Then he picked it up, drank it anyway, and started making calls. Marcus Webb filed a federal injunction at 2:17 in the afternoon on a Monday, and by 3 o'clock, the story had already broken on the regional newswire in a way that no one, not Marcus, not Jim, and certainly not Sheriff Blake Whitmore, had fully anticipated. It wasn't the filing itself that lit the match. It was the attached exhibit. Marcus, with the particular precision of a man who had spent 16 years learning exactly what could and could not be made part of a public legal record, had included in the injunction filing a 3-paragraph summary of the permit revocation's legal deficiencies, and within that summary, almost as a footnote, a single sentence noting that the petitioners had reason to believe the revocation was motivated by factors unrelated to legitimate public safety concerns, and that documentation supporting this belief was being prepared for submission to the appropriate federal oversight authority. One sentence. ends. 29 words. Darcy Cho at the local paper found it in the public filing database at 3:15. She called Marcus's phone at 3:20. He let it go to voicemail. She called the chapter's main line at 3:25. Dice answered, listened for 30 seconds, and then said, "I'll have someone call you back," in the tone of voice that meant he was immediately calling Jim. Jim was at the garage on Route 7 going over the logistics map for the run with Roadblock Torres when his phone rang. He listened to Dice for 45 seconds without speaking. Then he said, "Tell Marcus I need him at the clubhouse in an hour." He hung up, looked at Roadblock, and said, "We need to accelerate the timeline." Roadblock, 6'4" former Marine. A man who expressed most of his emotions through the precise calibration of how hard he set things down on tables, set his coffee down carefully. "How much?" "Everything," Jim said. "Whatever we were planning to do in 3 weeks, I need it done in 10 days. Roadblock looked at the logistics map spread on the workbench between them. It was covered in colored markers, green for confirmed staging areas, red for road closure points, blue for vendor positions, yellow for the medical and safety personnel. Marcus had already contracted for the day of the run. It was a serious piece of planning. It represented hundreds of hours of work. 10 days Roadblock said not as a complaint, as a calculation. Can you do it? Roadblock picked up his coffee again. Yeah, he said, we can do it. The meeting at the clubhouse that evening pulled in everyone who mattered. Jim Marcus Dice Roadblock, Sandra Reeves from the women's chapter, Gear Hoffman from Bakersfield, and 4 other chapter presidents who had driven in specifically because the filing had made it onto their feeds, and they wanted to know what was happening directly from Jim's mouth, not from a news alert. Jim stood at the head of the table and didn't waste time. The injunction is filed, he said. The federal court will likely issue a temporary restraining order within 48 to 72 hours. Marcus's assessment is that the revocation is legally indefensible on its face. That means we probably get the permit back, but probably isn't certainly and certainly isn't now, and we have 10 days. What does Whitmore do next? Sandra asked. He escalates, Jim said flatly. That's who he is. We handed him a federal filing and a news story that frames him as a man obstructing a charity run for a dying child. His choices are to back down, which he won't, or to go harder. He looked around the table. So we should expect him to go harder. Harder how? Gear asked. Marcus answered that one. He controls the sheriff's department. That means he controls law enforcement visibility in this county for the next 10 days. He could make life difficult for our members, traffic stops, harassment, inspections of the clubhouse. He could use the local media to keep pushing the public safety narrative. Marcus paused. He could try to manufacture an incident. The room got very quiet. Manufacture, Sandra repeated. Provoke a response that gives him a real reason to shut us down, Marcus said. That's the play if he's smart and desperate, and I think he's both. Jim looked at every face at the table, which means every one of our people needs to hear this directly and clearly. We do not react to anything. No confrontations, no arguments, no incidents. If a deputy pulls you over, you are polite and cooperative, and you record everything. If anyone approaches you looking for a fight, you walk away. If a camera shows up anywhere near any of our members, you behave like the person you'd want your kids to see on the news. He paused. We are not giving him a single frame. Gear leaned forward. You really think he'd go that far, manufacturing something? I think, Jim said carefully, that he has a lot to lose. And I think Marcus may have found some of the reasons why. All eyes went to Marcus. Marcus had been quiet through most of the meeting, which was not unusual, but tonight there was a particular quality to his silence, the quality of a man carrying something heavy and being very careful about how he set it down. He opened the manila folder in front of him and slid a single sheet of paper toward the center of the table. I want to be clear about what I'm about to say, Marcus began. None of this is confirmed. None of it has been verified by anyone other than me, and none of it leaves this room. He told them what he'd found, the seized assets, the shell companies, the Nevada LLC with the mother-in-law's maiden name, the no-bid contracts, the campaign finance numbers that didn't line up. He spoke in a flat, controlled voice, the voice of a man who had disciplined himself not to editorialize because the facts laid out plainly were editorial enough on their own. When he finished, no one spoke for several seconds. Then Dice said very quietly, he's been stealing from the county. I believe so, Marcus said, through asset forfeiture. It's a mechanism that's chronically under-regulated and under-audited, which is why it's been used this way before. It just hasn't been used this way here, not at this scale, not that anyone caught. Until you, Sandra said. Marcus glanced down at the folder. Until me. How much? Gear asked. My best estimate, based on the assets I've been able to trace, between $800,000 and $1.2 million over 2 years. Another silence. This one had weight. And he's pulling our permit, Dice said. The disbelief in his voice wasn't naive. It was the specific disbelief of a man who understood exactly how audacious the irony was. He's stealing over $1 million from the people of this county, and he's using public safety as the excuse to stop us from raising money to save a child's life. Yes, Marcus said simply. Jim looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at Marcus. The federal contact. I got a call back this afternoon, Marcus said. There's an agent, I won't say more than that right now, who is willing to have a preliminary conversation. Off the record, to assess what we have. To 2 days from now, I drive up to Sacramento. Jim nodded once. What do you need from me? Nothing right now. Let me handle the first conversation. If they take it seriously, then we talk about next steps. Marcus paused. Jim, I need you to understand something. If this goes where I think it might go, this isn't just going to affect Whitmore. This could be a significant federal investigation. It's going to take time. It's not going to be resolved before the run. I know, Jim said. The run is separate from the corruption file. I know that too. I'm telling you because I want to make sure we're clear about what we're doing and why. We're not doing this to get leverage over him. We're doing this because it's right. Marcus held Jim's gaze. Even if it doesn't save the permit. Jim looked at him for a long moment. It's always been about more than the permit, he said. Do what's right. That's the only instruction I have. Marcus nodded, and something in his expression, not quite relief, but close to it, told Jim that this was the answer he'd needed to hear. The meeting broke up at 10 o'clock. People drove home through quiet streets. Jim stayed behind and sat alone in the clubhouse for a while, not doing anything in particular, just thinking. He thought about Lily. He thought about the treatment window in Seattle and the 8 weeks that were now down to 7. He thought about Carol at the diner counter with the coffee pot she'd forgotten to pour. He thought about Whitmore behind his desk with the photograph of himself shaking hands with senators, already 3 steps ahead in a game he had no idea he was losing. He thought about his daughter Grace asleep right now at her mother's house across town, 7 years old, healthy, unaware. He picked up his phone and called his ex-wife. She answered on the 3rd ring, drowsy. Jim, it's late. I know, I'm sorry, I just wanted... He stopped, started again. Is Grace okay? A pause. He could hear the shift in his ex-wife's voice, the move from drowsy irritation to something more careful. She knew him well enough to know when a question like that was about more than the question. She's fine, she's asleep. She had a good day. Good, Jim said. That's good. Another pause. You okay? Yeah, he said. I'm okay. He wasn't entirely sure that was true, but it was close enough for tonight. The next 48 hours moved fast and jagged, the way time moves when multiple forces are accelerating toward each other. Whitmore held his 3rd press conference on Tuesday morning. This one was different from the previous 2 sharper, more aggressive stripped of the careful bureaucratic language he'd used before. He stood at the courthouse steps and talked about organized crime with a directness that his previous statements had carefully avoided, and while he still stopped short of naming the Hells Angels specifically in a way that opened him to a defamation claim, the implication was as clear as a punch. The people of Oak Haven County deserve to know, he said, facing the camera with the practiced gravity of a man who had been coached extensively on how to look trustworthy while saying untrustworthy things, that my office is not willing to allow the legitimate emotional appeal of a charitable cause to be used as cover for organizations with documented histories of criminal activity. Darcy Cho's hand went up immediately. Sheriff, can you specify what documented criminal activity you're referring to in connection with this specific event's organizers? I'm referring to the broader organizational history. The specific organizer's sheriff, James Caulfield, and the Oak Haven chapter. Can you document criminal activity? I'm not going to characterize the legal situation further at this time. Is it accurate that the county has received a federal injunction challenging the permit revocation? A flicker, just a flicker, but Darcy caught it and wrote it down. My office is reviewing the filing. Does that mean you're aware the revocation may be legally invalid? It means my office is reviewing the filing, Whitmore said again, and looked away from her toward a camera on the other side of the crowd and smiled the smile of a man trying to look calm while standing on ground that has just shifted under his feet. By Tuesday afternoon, the press conference had done something Whitmore hadn't intended. It had made the story bigger. A regional television station that had been tracking it as a minor local interest piece suddenly saw a confrontation angle that played nationally. The dying girl, the biker charity, the ambitious sheriff, making what looked increasingly like a politically motivated power play. They ran a 6-minute segment at 6 o'clock with footage of Carol at the diner, a photograph of Lily that Carol had reluctantly agreed to share, and an interview with Jim that was shot outside the clubhouse in the late afternoon light. Jim wore clean clothes. He was composed. He said exactly what he'd been saying from the beginning. We filed the right paperwork. We followed every rule. We organized a legal and peaceful event to raise money for a little girl who needs help. We're going to keep doing that until either the courts tell us we can't or the event happens and Lily gets her treatment. He paused. We're not angry, we're focused. The segment aired at 6. By 7, it had 40,000 views on the station's social media page. By 9, it had 120,000. By midnight, Lily Danvers' name was trending in California. Carol saw it on her phone at 11:30 sitting at the kitchen table while Lily slept in the next room. She sat there for a long time just looking at the screen. The comments, she'd never been a person who read comments, had always been warned that comments were where the internet went to be its worst self, but she read them now, scrolling slowly through hundreds of strangers from Fresno and San Jose and Los Angeles and places she'd never been, saying they were praying for Lily, saying they were angry at the sheriff, saying they were sending what they could. There was a Venmo notification, then another. Then she stopped checking Venmo because the numbers were moving too fast to track and it was making her hands shake. She sat in her kitchen at 11:30 at night and put her face in her hands and let herself cry. Not the controlled diner counter crying she'd been doing for 8 months, but the real kind. The kind that comes when the wall you've been holding up for so long finally gets a little help from the other side. She cried for a while. Then she got up, washed her face, and went to check on Lily. Lily was awake. She was lying on her side with her eyes open, looking at the glow of the nightlight on the ceiling. "Mom," she said. "Hey, baby, you should be sleeping. Are the motorcycle men still helping?" Carol sat on the edge of the bed. "Yeah, baby, they are." "Is the sheriff still being mean?" Carol smoothed the hair back from Lily's forehead. "He's trying to." Lily was quiet for a moment. "Why does he want to stop them?" Carol thought about how to answer that in a way that was honest without being a weight a 6-year-old needed to carry. "Some people," she said carefully, "are more worried about themselves than about other people. And when someone else does something good, it makes them feel small, so they try to stop it." Lily considered this with the gravity that children apply to large ideas. "That's not very nice." "No," Carol agreed. "It stung." "It's not." "Is he going to win?" Carol looked at her daughter, her 41-pound, dark-eyed, gap-toothed daughter, who asked questions like that with a matter-of-fact steadiness that broke her heart and remade it every single day. "No," she said, "he's not." Lily looked at her for a moment. Then she closed her eyes and said, "Okay," in the voice of someone who has decided to trust the answer and let sleep take over. Carol sat there until she was sure Lily was asleep. Then she went back to the kitchen table and texted Jim Caulfield's number. He had given it to her at the diner, written on a paper napkin, an act of such unceremonious practicality that it had struck her as more reassuring than any formal gesture could have been. "If you need anything." And typed, "Thank you, whatever happens." "Thank you." His response came 4 minutes later, which told her he was still awake. It said, "She's going to be okay." 3 words, no embellishment, no promise he couldn't keep wrapped up in language designed to soften the stakes. She read it twice and then put the phone face down on the table and sat quietly in the kitchen until it was time to get ready for the morning shift. The federal court issued the temporary restraining order Wednesday afternoon at 4:17. It came through Marcus's email while he was still on the road back from Sacramento, and he pulled over on the shoulder of Route 99 and read it twice on his phone before calling Jim. "We got it," he said when Jim picked up. The TRO, they agreed the revocation appears to lack documented cause. The permit is reinstated pending the full hearing. The run is back on." Marcus paused. "Jim, it's back on." Jim was at the garage. He was standing at the workbench with his hand on a wrench he hadn't been using, just holding it the way people hold things when their hands need somewhere to be while their mind is somewhere else. He set the wrench down. "Good," he said. His voice was steady and quiet. "How'd Sacramento go?" A pause. "The agent I met with is interested, very interested. She's going to need time to go through what I've compiled, and she'll need a forensic accountant to verify the financial trail. But," another pause, longer this time, "she told me off the record that the pattern I described is consistent with something they've had preliminary indicators on for over a year." Jim was very still. "They already had indicators. Preliminary, nothing they could move on. But what I've built," she said, "it fills in gaps." The weight of that settled in the space between them on the phone line. Not triumph, something more serious than triumph. The recognition that what Marcus had stumbled into while looking for a way to save a charity permit was something considerably larger and older than Blake Whitmore's ambitions. Does she know how far it goes? Jim asked. She's not going to tell me that, Marcus said. But she didn't tell me to stop. Jim looked at the garage wall, the map with the red tacks, 46. Keep cooperating with whatever they need, he said. However long it takes. This isn't about us anymore. It never was, Marcus said. No, Jim agreed, it wasn't. He called Dice next and told him the run was back on. Dice made a sound on the phone that was somewhere between a laugh and an exhale and said, I'll start making calls. He called Roadblock and told him to finalize the logistics. He called Sandra and Gear and the other chapter presidents, and each call was brief and direct because there was no time for anything else. Then he drove to the diner on Sycamore Street. Carol was on the tail end of her shift, wiping down the counter with the mechanical efficiency of someone who has done the same motion 10,000 times. She looked up when Jim came through the door, and something in his face told her before he said anything. The permit's back, he said. She stopped wiping. Her hand just stopped. The federal court reinstated it, he said. The run is happening. Carol put both hands flat on the counter and looked at them for a moment. Marisol appeared in the kitchen window and looked at Jim, then at Carol, and read the room with the accuracy of someone who had been paying close attention for weeks. The run's on, Marisol called through the window. The run's on, Jim confirmed. Marisol made a sound like the world had just righted itself on its axis and disappeared back into the kitchen. Carol looked up at Jim. Her eyes were bright, but she was holding it together, the same particular composure she'd been carrying for months. The composure of a woman who had decided long ago that she would not fall apart because falling apart was a luxury she could not afford. Went to 10 days, Jim said, as planned. And Whitmore, Jim looked at her evenly. He's not finished yet, he said. Don't let anyone tell you it's over. He's going to push back. I just want you to know that whatever he does, we're ready for it. And Lily's going to get to Seattle. Carol held his gaze. How do you know? Because I've been watching people underestimate determined men and women my entire life, Jim said. And I've learned that's always the losing side. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she nodded once with the solemnity of someone accepting a promise they intend to hold you to. More coffee, she asked. Please, he said. She poured it. They didn't say much else. They didn't need to. Whitmore got the news about the TRO from Garland at 4:45 in his office while he was on a call with Paul Renner reviewing talking points for an upcoming campaign event. He put Renner on hold without a word and listened to Garland read the relevant section of the federal court's order in a flat, careful voice. Then he sat quietly for 3 seconds. Get me the county attorney, he said. I've already called. She says the order is solid. She doesn't think we win at the full hearing. Get me someone who thinks differently. Blake, Garland stopped. Garland very rarely used his first name, and when he did, it meant something. I need to say something to you. Say it. Another pause, the pause of a man choosing his words with the care of someone who knows they will not get to unsay them. I've been with this department for 18 years. I've worked under 3 sheriffs, and I've never, he stopped again. What we're doing here, the press conference, the permit thing, I need to understand what the actual goal is, because it looks to me like we're spending a lot of institutional credibility to stop a charity event. And that's, he exhaled, that doesn't sit right with me. The silence that followed was the kind that has texture. Whitmore let it stretch. Are you questioning my judgment, Garland? I'm asking you to explain it to me, Garland said, because I want to be on the right side of this. You're on my side, Whitmore said. That is the right side. Garland was quiet for a moment. Then, the girl's name is on the news now, Lily. She's 6 years old and she weighs 41 pounds, and there's a picture of her on every feed I look at. He paused. I have grandkids, Blake. Whitmore said nothing. I just want to understand, Garland said more quietly. What is this actually about? Another long silence. Then Whitmore said, it's about control. It's about who this county respects and who it doesn't. It's about making sure that when I run for state senate, the people who vote in this county associate me with law and order, not with the image of Hell's Angels being celebrated as heroes. His voice was flat and honest in a way it almost never was stripped of the performance layer it usually carried. That's what it's about. Garland absorbed that, and the girl will presumably get her money some other way. Garland didn't say anything for a moment. Then, I'll get you the county attorney. His voice had changed, not dramatically, just shifted somehow, like something had settled into place inside him that hadn't been in place before. Good, Whitmore said, and picked Renner back up. What Whitmore didn't know, what he had no way of knowing, was that Garland Pruitt sat at his desk for 11 minutes after hanging up the phone doing nothing. Just sitting, looking at his hands, thinking about his grandkids and a 6-year-old girl who weighed 41 pounds in a career he had spent 18 years building in service of something he was increasingly unable to name. Then he opened his desk drawer, took out a personal cell phone, not his work phone, and made a call. Not to the county attorney, to Darcy Cho. He didn't say much. He just said, "I think you should file a public records request for the asset forfeiture documentation from the past 3 years. All of it, every seizure, every transfer, every registered disposition." A pause. "And I think you should do it today." Darcy was quiet for 3 seconds. "Why?" she asked. "Because I think you'll find it interesting," Garland said, and hung up. He sat there for another minute. Then he straightened his uniform, stood up, and walked back out into the office to do his job, because his job was still his job, and he was still going to do it until the day came when he couldn't anymore. That day was closer than he knew. By Thursday morning, the story had metastasized beyond anything the local ecosystem could contain. National outlets picked it up. A major cable news network ran a 4-minute segment that framed it as a human interest story with a clear villain and a clear emotional center. The sick child, the unlikely heroes, the politically ambitious lawman, and the framing was not inaccurate, which is the most dangerous kind of framing for the person in the unflattering role. Whitmore's press office was fielding calls from 11 different journalists by 9 o'clock. His campaign office called 3 times before 10. Paul Renner, who had been trying to reach him since 7 in the morning, finally got through at 10:15 and said in the voice of a man who has moved past frustration into something colder, "You need to hear me right now. This story has gone national. The coverage is running 9-1 against you. I am looking at polling data from the district that tells me your favorable rating has dropped 6 points in 72 hours. 6 points. Whitmore's jaw tightened. It'll settle down. It won't settle down if you keep fighting it. Blake, I am telling you, as someone whose entire job is to protect your future, you need to find a way to gracefully exit this situation. Issue a statement about reconsidering in light of new information. Let the run happen. Get photographed with the little girl at the finish line. Turn this into a win. I'm not..." Whitmore stopped, started again. "I'm not going to stand at a finish line full of Hell's Angels and shake their hands for a camera. Then your polling numbers are going to keep moving in the direction they're moving," Renner said flatly. "And I need you to understand that a state Senate run is not survivable on 44% favorable. It's not even close." Whitmore was silent. "Blake," Renner's voice shifted, not softer exactly, but more direct. "What is actually going on here? What aren't you telling me? Because in 15 years of doing this job, I have never seen a client fight this hard to stay in a losing position unless there was something specific they were afraid of someone finding." The silence that followed that question lasted long enough to tell Renner something. "Blake," he said quietly. "There's nothing to find," Whitmore said. The words came out a fraction of a second too fast. Renner heard it. He had spent 15 years listening to people say things a fraction of a second too fast and learning what it meant. "I need you to be honest with me," he said, "because if there's something I need to know..." "There's nothing," Whitmore said, steadier this time, controlled. Another pause. "Okay," Renner said, in the voice of a man who does not believe okay but has decided not to press further. "Then let the run happen. Issue the statement. I'll draft it." "I'll think about it," Whitmore said. "Don't think too long," Renner said. "Every hour this continues costs you more than you can afford." Whitmore hung up and sat in his chair for a long time looking at the framed photograph on his desk himself, and the senator 2 years ago, the clean handshake of men going places. He looked at it like a man who is trying to remember why he wanted something and finding that the memory has become difficult to access. Then he picked up his direct line to the department's tactical division. What happened next happened fast and without warning on a Friday afternoon, and it would later be described in the federal investigation report, in the news coverage, in the civil suit that followed, as the moment Whitmore stopped making political mistakes and started making legal ones. The SWAT team hit the clubhouse on Route 7 at 2 in the afternoon, 12 officers in tactical gear. A warrant signed that morning by a county judge, a judge who had been appointed during Whitmore's tenure, a detail that would later receive significant attention, citing suspected illegal weapon storage based on an anonymous tip. There were no illegal weapons at the clubhouse. There never had been because Jim had been obsessively careful about exactly that for exactly this reason, because he had known from the beginning that this was the play available to Whitmore if he decided to go all the way. What the SWAT team found was 12 motorcycles in various stages of maintenance, a kitchen with a coffee maker and a half-eaten box of donuts, a pool table, a storage room full of charity-run logistics, materials, wristbands, vendor maps, sound equipment, and Marcus's carefully locked filing cabinet, which they had no warrant to open, and which the lead officer, to his credit, left untouched. They were in and out in 45 minutes. They found nothing. They damaged 3 motorcycles in the search process and broke 2 windows. Jim was not there when it happened. Dice called him at 2:11. They hit the clubhouse, Dice said. His voice was carefully controlled. SWAT, warrant for weapons. Jim was silent for 3 seconds. Anyone there? Richie was there. He cooperated fully. He has everything on video. Is he okay? He's fine. They roughed up the place pretty good. 3 bikes are damaged. Jim looked out the window of his truck at the afternoon sky. He breathed in through his nose and out through his mouth, which was the thing he did when he needed to close the distance between the reaction rising in his chest and the one he intended to show the world. Okay, he said. Jim, I'm okay, Dice. He breathed again. Call Marcus. Tell him what happened, and tell him I want a complete inventory of any damage with photographs before anyone touches anything. Already done. Good. And Dice, he paused. Tell Richie I'm proud of how he handled it. Dice was quiet for a moment. He's pretty mad. He should be. Tell him to stay mad. Tell him to stay disciplined and stay mad, because in 10 days that anger is going to mean something. He hung up and called Marcus. Marcus answered instantly. I know. Dice just told me. Is the filing cabinet okay? They didn't touch it. The warrant didn't cover document storage. Marcus paused. Jim, this is significant. A SWAT raid on a fabricated tip that's not political maneuvering anymore. That's abuse of law enforcement authority. That's something a federal judge is going to care about. Document everything, Jim said. Already started. Another pause. Jim, something else. I got a text this morning from a number I didn't recognize. It said, quote, look at the property transfer records for Route 12 more carefully. The second LLC, there's a name you'll recognize. Unquote. Marcus paused. I looked. And the second LLC in the chain has a registered agent whose name I recognized because he appeared in the campaign finance discrepancies I found earlier. He's a bundler, someone who aggregates political donations, and he's registered as a co-principal on 3 of the no-bid county contracts. Jim was very still. Someone's helping us. Someone's helping us, Marcus confirmed. Someone with access to things I couldn't have found on my own. Who sent the text? I have no idea. The number's a burner. Jim thought about that for a moment. Does it matter? Marcus considered. No, he said. The information either checks out or it doesn't. I'll verify everything independently. Then keep going. Jim paused. And Marcus, when you talk to the federal agent again, tell her about the SWAT raid. First thing, Marcus said. Jim drove back to the clubhouse. The damage was real and visible, and it made something in him contract with a cold-controlled fury. 3 bikes, one of them, Richie's personal, built a machine he'd spent 2 years restoring with bodywork dented and a mirror snapped off. 2 windows boarded with plywood. The kitchen left in disarray. The storage room with charity-run materials scattered across the floor, where officers had clearly gone through it with unnecessary thoroughness. Richie stood in the middle of it with his arms crossed and his jaw set in the specific stillness of a very large man who was exercising extraordinary self-control. Talk to me, Jim said. They had a warrant, Richie said. Weapons, anonymous tip. His voice was flat. There's no weapons here. There hasn't been. You know that. I know. They knew that too. They had to know. Richie looked at him. This was just to break things, just to show they could. Yes, Jim said. So what do we do? Jim looked around the room, at the scattered materials, at the boarded windows, at the 3 damaged bikes, at Richie, who had been with the chapter for 9 years and had never in 9 years given Jim a single reason for concern about his judgment or his character. We clean up, Jim said. We document everything, And then we keep planning the run. Richie looked at him for a long moment. That's it. That's it, Jim said. For now. For now, Richie repeated, and something in the way he said it, not threatening, not impatient, just certain, told Jim that Richie understood. That for now was doing a lot of work in that sentence. That what it meant was there is a later, and in the later, everything that has been done to us will be part of the accounting. They cleaned up. All of them. Jim, Dice, Richie, Roadblock, 4 other members who showed up without being called because they'd seen the news alert. They cleaned up together the way people clean up together, when the cleaning isn't just about the mess, but about refusing to let the mess be the last word. By 6 that evening, the clubhouse was back in order. The boarded windows remained. That was a practical choice, not a symbolic one. The 3 damaged bikes were lined up in the garage, their repairs already budgeted and scheduled. And on the workbench under the map with the 46 red tacks, Marcus's laptop was open and running its screen filled with financial records and property transfers, and the slow, meticulous construction of a case that had already, though none of them knew it, yet attracted the attention of people far beyond Oak Haven County. 7 miles away in the county administration building, Garland Pruitt sat at his desk and looked at his work phone and his personal phone, both on the desk in front of him, and made a decision that had been building for weeks, maybe months, maybe longer. He reached for the personal phone. He scrolled to the number he'd called earlier in the week and dialed it again. Darcy Cho answered on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd call back." "The public records request," Garland said. "The asset forfeiture documents." "I filed it this afternoon," Darcy said. "Should have a response in." "You're going to get a response that says the records are under administrative review," Garland said. "They'll stall it as long as they legally can." A pause. "How do you know that?" "Because I know how this office operates." He stopped, then more slowly. "There's someone you need to talk to, someone who has already found things you're going to want to know about." He paused again. "His name is Marcus Webb." Silence on the line. Then Darcy said very quietly, "The paralegal, the biker chapter." "He's more than a paralegal," Garland said, "and what he's found is more than you've been looking for." He looked at the framed commendation on his wall. 18 years of service, 2 commendations, 1 life spent in this building doing work he had believed in. "Tell him Deputy Pruitt sent you. He'll know what that means." He hung up before she could ask any more questions. Sat for a moment, then put the personal phone in his jacket pocket, stood, picked up his keys, and walked out of the building into the evening air. He breathed it in. Oak Haven at dusk, the sky going amber and purple over the hills, the town laid out below the administration building in its ordinary evening configurations. Lights coming on in diners and living rooms, people moving through their lives with the unconscious assumption that the systems around them were basically honest. Garland had spent 18 years being one of those systems. He got in his car and drove home. And the next morning when Darcy Cho called Marcus Webb and said, "Deputy Pruitt sent me," Marcus sat very still for a moment and then said, "Tell me what you already have, and I'll tell you what I've found." Because this was the moment things were no longer containable, no longer a chapter president and his lawyer building a quiet case in a back office on Fuller Street. This was something that had broken its banks and was moving on its own now, gathering force from sources Jim had never anticipated, flowing toward a reckoning that was no longer just about a charity permit or a dying girl or even a corrupt sheriff. It was about what happens when a community decides all at once and from several different directions at the same time that enough is enough. And in the diner on Sycamore Street, Carol Danvers poured coffee and cleared plates and checked her phone between tables and watched the donation total. The online fundraiser Marcus had quietly set up as a backup separate from the run climb, past $40,000, then 50, then 60. As strangers from places she'd never been decided that Lily's name was a reason to do something. She didn't tell Lily about the numbers yet. She didn't want to explain them and then have them not be enough. She just let them climb. And across town, Jim Caulfield sat in the rebuilt, cleaned-up clubhouse at the long table with the logistics map and the color-coded markers and 10 days left on the clock. And he made calls and answered questions and gave directions and did what he had always done. He kept moving, kept planning, kept refusing to accept that the story ended any way other than the way it needed to end. Outside, the night came down over Oak Haven. And somewhere in Sacramento, in a federal field office that had been quietly aware of Blake Whitmore's name For longer than anyone in Oak Haven knew, an agent named Sandra Kim opened a new case file, typed in a name, and pressed enter. The case file that agent Sandra Kim opened in Sacramento on that Thursday night had a title that was deliberately bland: Administrative Irregularities Review. Oak Haven County, because the best federal investigations always started with the most boring possible name. She had been with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit for 11 years, and she had learned early that the cases worth the most attention were the ones that looked on the surface like paperwork problems. This one had stopped looking like a paperwork problem approximately 20 minutes into her first conversation with Marcus Webb. She called him Friday morning, 8:15, before she'd finished her first coffee. Marcus picked up on the second ring, which told her he'd been awake for a while. "Mr. Webb," she said, "I've had time to review what you sent. And Marian, I need more." She paused. "Not because what you have is insufficient, because what you have is the edge of something considerably larger. And before I move forward, I need to understand exactly how far it goes." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I have a journalist who contacted me last night. A deputy, I won't name him yet, directed her to me. She has access to records I haven't been able to pull through public channels." "What journalist?" "Darcy Cho, local paper Oak Haven. She's been covering this story from the beginning. She's careful and she's accurate. Can she sit on what she finds until I tell her it's appropriate to publish?" "I don't know. I can ask her." "Ask her today," Kim said, "because if this breaks in the press before we're ready, it becomes much harder to build a case that holds in court. And I want this to hold in court, Mr. Webb. I want it to hold all the way to a conviction." Marcus absorbed that. "You think it goes that far?" "I think it might go considerably further than either of us knows right now," Kim said, "which is why I need you and your journalist contact to exercise patience." "Lily Danvers has a treatment window in Seattle that closes in 7 weeks, Marcus said. The words were flat and factual, not emotional, which somehow made them land harder than if he tried to make them land hard. Kim was quiet for a moment. "I know, I read the story. My daughter is 8. A pause that carried something personal in it, quickly controlled. "The run is in 10 days. Nothing I'm doing will interfere with the run. The investigation timeline is separate. But Whitmore is still sheriff for 10 more days, Marcus said. "Yes," Kim said, "he is. And he's already sent a SWAT team to our clubhouse on a fabricated tip." "I know. That's in the file." She paused. "Mr. Webb, I want to be honest with you. I cannot protect you from what he does in the next 10 days. I can document it, and I will. But the legal process operates on its own schedule." "I understand that," Marcus said. "I've operated within the legal process my entire career." "Then you know the next 10 days are going to require patience." "We've been patient," Marcus said, and there was something in his voice, not anger, not impatience, just the particular wariness of people who have been patient while things were done to them, that Sandra Kim heard clearly and wrote a single word in the margin of her notepad in response. The word was faster. She had protocols. She had procedures. She had a chain of command and a standard timeline for this category of investigation. But she also had 11 years of experience, and 11 years of experience told her that the cases where you moved by the book, while the situation on the ground moved faster than the book could account for, were the cases you look back on later and wished you had done differently. She picked up her direct line and called her supervisor. At the same time, 10 days out from the run, Jim was running on a kind of disciplined momentum that had become its own force. He was moving so constantly, so purposefully, that there was no room inside the motion for the fear that would have been there if he'd stopped. He knew this about himself. He'd learned it in the Army, that movement was its own kind of armor, that the best way to manage what you couldn't control was to control everything you could with absolute precision. The logistics were close to airtight. Roadblock had confirmed every staging area. The vendor lineup was complete: food trucks, merchandise tables, a medical station staffed by 2 volunteer paramedics from a chapter in Stockton. The sound system was set up at the fairgrounds finish area. 411 riders confirmed, with a wait list of 60 more who'd registered after the national news coverage and wanted in even if there wasn't technically room. Jim let 30 of the waitlist riders in. 41 was not a number he was prepared to say no to. He held a final all-riders briefing on Friday evening at the fairgrounds, standing on the flatbed of a pickup truck with 441 people spread across the grass in front of him. He didn't use a microphone. His voice carried. "I'm going to say this once," he said, "and I'm going to say it clearly because every one of you needs to hear it the same way. This event is a charity run. It is not a protest. It is not a demonstration. It is not a confrontation. It is a charity run for a 6-year-old girl named Lily Danvers who needs a medical procedure that costs $250,000, and every dollar we raise on Sunday goes directly to that procedure. That is the entire mission." He looked out across the crowd, riders from 12 different chapters, different backgrounds, different histories. Men and women who had come from 300 miles away because the story had reached them and they had decided to show up. "You will follow every traffic law on that road," he continued. "You will ride in formation in order at legal speeds. If you are stopped by law enforcement for any reason, you will be cooperative, you will be respectful, and you will record everything. You will not argue. You will not raise your voice. You will not give anyone a reason to use the word incident in connection with this run." He paused. "We have been called criminals. We have had our clubhouse raided on a false warrant. We have been publicly accused of things no evidence supports. And in response to all of that, we have been patient, legal, and disciplined. That continues on Sunday, all the way to the finish line." The silence in the crowd was the particular silence of people who are listening because they want to, not because they feel obligated. "One more thing," Jim said. "When we cross that finish line and the money is counted and it's enough, and it will be enough, Lily Danvers is going to know that 441 people who had never met her showed up for her on a Sunday morning because she mattered. Because the story of a child who needs help in a community that refuses to abandon her is a story worth writing for." He stopped. "That's who we are. That's what Sunday is." Nobody cheered. The quiet that followed was better than cheering. It was the quiet of people who had taken something in and were carrying it. Sandra Reeves found him afterward as the crowd was dispersing. "Good speech," she said. "Not a speech," Jim said. "Instructions." She almost smiled. "Good instructions." He drove home that night later than he'd planned, and he lay in bed in the dark and listened to the silence of his house and thought about Sunday. He thought about the road. He thought about 441 bikes moving in formation down Highway 9 in the morning light. He thought about what Whitmore still had available to him and whether he'd use it. He thought about what Marcus had told him that afternoon, that Agent Kim had moved faster than expected, that the investigation had been formally escalated, that 2 additional agents had been assigned, that Darcy Cho had agreed to hold her story until Kim gave the signal in exchange for exclusive access when the signal came. He thought about Garland Pruitt, who had sent Marcus and Darcy to each other and then gone quiet, a quiet that felt to Jim like the quiet of a man who has made a decision and is waiting to see where it lands. He thought about Lily, 41 pounds, dark eyes, gap-toothed smile, but asking if the motorcycle men were really going to help. He fell asleep at 1 in the morning and was up at 5 because there was still work to do. Saturday arrived with the particular nervous energy of the day before something significant, the kind of energy that moves through a community and makes people at the grocery store make eye contact with strangers and feel the weight of a shared awareness that tomorrow will be different from today. In the diner on Sycamore Street, Carol was covering a double shift because the other waitress had called out sick and Marisol's brother was visiting him from Fresno, and Carol had said it was fine, she needed to keep busy anyway, which was true. She moved through the morning rush with the mechanical grace of 11 years of practice, and she let the ordinary rhythm of the work hold her steady because the alternative was sitting still with her thoughts, and that was not something she was prepared to do on the day before the run. The diner regulars, the retirees, and the construction workers, and the 2 old men who played chess at the corner table every morning had developed a solidarity around her situation that expressed itself in the way communities express solidarity when they don't know what else to do. They overtipped. Every table that morning left more than the bill, sometimes much more, with notes scrawled on napkins. One of the chess-playing old men left $200 in cash under his coffee cup without saying a word about it. Carol found it when she cleared the table and stood there for a moment, with the money in her hand, the diner noise moving around her. Marisol appeared beside her. "You okay?" "People keep being kind," Carol said in a voice that suggested this was still somehow catching her off guard. "I don't know how to—" "You don't need to know how to," Marisol said. "You just let them." Across town in the county administration building, Whitmore had been in his office since 7 with the door closed, which Garland knew because he had been watching the door from his desk since 7:15. The door stayed closed through the morning briefing, through the shift change, through the call from the county attorney's office that Garland took on Whitmore's behalf because Whitmore hadn't come out to take it himself. At 10:30, the door opened. Whitmore looked like a man who had not slept, which Garland had never seen before. Whitmore had always been meticulous about his appearance, about the performance of competence that good appearance carried. The slight puffiness under his eyes, the tie not quite centered, the hair slightly less controlled than usual, these were tells that Garland cataloged without expression. "I need you to do something for me," Whitmore said. "What is it?" Whitmore looked at him for a moment. His eyes were assessing in a way that had always made Garland slightly uncomfortable, the assessment of a man who is constantly measuring everyone around him against some private calculation of usefulness. "I need you to pull together every piece of documentation we have on the chapter. Every contact report, every incident record, every association filing. I want a package by this afternoon." Garland held his gaze. "What's the package for?" "I'm going to hand it to the press this afternoon. Give them something to work with going into the run tomorrow." Garland was very still. "You're going to release law enforcement records to the press, selectively, with appropriate redactions." "Blake," he stopped. The first name thing again. Whitmore noticed it this time. Garland saw the slight narrowing of his eyes. "We've had this conversation. The run is tomorrow. The federal court reinstated the permit. Whatever we release today shapes the narrative going in," Whitmore said. "I need people remembering who these people are before they start raising money on camera." "The records we have on the Oak Haven chapter are minimal," Garland said. "Mostly traffic stops and one noise complaint from 6 years ago. There's the broader organizational history." "That's not their history. That's the national organization's history. Using it against this specific chapter would be—" He stopped, chose his next word carefully. "Misleading." Whitmore looked at him with an expression that was trying to be patient and landing closer to calculating. "I didn't ask for your legal opinion, Garland. I asked you to pull the documentation." Garland looked at him for 4 seconds. 4 full seconds, long enough that Whitmore noticed, and something shifted in his face, a slight recalibration, the recognition that the ground under this particular conversation was less stable than he'd assumed. "I'll pull what we have," Garland said. "Everything we have accurately represented." "Good. And I'm going to attach a cover memo documenting the scope of the request and the purpose as you've described it to me for the department's records." A pause. "That's not necessary. It's standard procedure for any release of law enforcement records," Garland said evenly. "I'd do it regardless of who was asking." He held Whitmore's gaze. "Is there anything else?" Whitmore looked at him for another moment. Then, "No, that's all." Garland went back to his desk and sat down and put his hands flat on the surface and took a breath. Then he opened his desk drawer and took out the personal phone and sent a text to Darcy Cho. 3 words, "Watch for package." He put the phone away and started pulling documentation. The press package went out at 2 in the afternoon. It was, as Garland had said, it would be thin, a few contact reports, the noise complaint, a general background section on the Hells Angels as a national organization that was framed in a way that implied association without stating it directly. 3 journalists called the department's press line about it. 2 of them also called Marcus because Darcy had been quietly building a network of contacts around this story, and those contacts had started talking to each other. Marcus read the package in 20 minutes and called Jim. "He's burning the last of his credibility," Marcus said. "This package is almost nothing. The journalists who are any good are going to see right through it." "Almost nothing is still something," Jim said. "Someone who doesn't look closely is going to read the national organization history and connect it to us." "Yes," Marcus said. "But Jim, he's scared. This is what scared looks like. He's not controlling the narrative anymore. He's reacting to it." Jim considered that. What does a scared man with law enforcement authority do when his back is against a wall? Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Something stupid," he said, "or something desperate, or both." "That's what I'm worried about," Jim said. "Tomorrow." "Kim's team is monitoring," Marcus said. "She told me this morning she has agents in Oak Haven. Not publicly, but they're there." "Monitoring," Jim repeated. "Yes. Not intervening. Not unless something rises to the level where they have to." Jim sat with that for a moment. The knowledge that federal agents were present and watching was both reassuring and clarifying. Reassuring because it meant there was a backstop, clarifying because it meant that backstop had a specific threshold, and below that threshold, whatever happened tomorrow happened on its own terms. Okay, he said, we ride tomorrow like we planned. Clean, legal, tight formation. Whatever he does, we don't react. Jim, Marcus said quietly, whatever happens on that road tomorrow, I need you to promise me something. What? You don't go toward the line. If there's a confrontation, any confrontation, you stay behind it. You let me and the legal channels handle it. A pause. You're too important to this to end up in a position where a camera catches you in a bad frame. Jim almost said, I know. Then he thought about it honestly, about the specific way his anger ran, not hot and explosive, but cold and direct, the kind that moved toward a problem rather than away from it, and said instead, I'll do my best. That's not quite the promise I asked for. It's the honest version of it, Jim said. Marcus sighed. Fair enough. A pause. Get some sleep tonight. Jim almost laughed. You too. Neither of them slept much. Sunday arrived the way important days always do, with the same light, the same sounds, the same mundane mechanics of morning, as if the day had not been told yet about its own significance. Jim was dressed and at the staging area by 6:15, a full 2 hours before the run was scheduled to begin. Roadblock was already there going over the formation order with a clipboard and a coffee. Dice was managing the check-in table where riders were registering and getting their wristbands. Sandra Reeves had driven down from the Bay Area the night before and was overseeing the medical station setup with the focused competence of someone who had run 20 of these events and knew exactly which details people forgot. By 7:30, the staging area had the controlled electricity of a thing about to happen. 441 riders in leather and denim, some of them nervous, some of them steady, all of them aware of the weight of what they'd come for. The morning air was cool and smelled of exhaust and coffee and cut grass from the fairgrounds perimeter. Engines turned over and idled. Conversations happened in low voices. Someone's radio played country music briefly before the person turned it off, reading the room. Jim walked the staging area once end to end, speaking to people as he went, not speeches, just words. A name here, a hand on a shoulder there, the kind of presence that a leader offers when the thing they're leading toward is close enough to feel. He shook hands with Gear Hoffman and exchanged a look with him that said everything both of them didn't need to say out loud. He stopped for a moment with a rider he didn't recognize, a man in his 60s with a Vietnam Veterans of America patch on his vest, who had apparently driven up from San Diego after seeing the story on the news, and the man said, I don't know your girl Lily, but I know about being left behind when you needed someone to show up. And Jim shook his hand for a moment longer than usual. At 8:10, Dice appeared at his elbow. His face was doing the thing it did when the news was something Jim wasn't going to like. We have a situation, or tell me. Highway 9, about 2 miles up from our planned route entry, Roadblock just got a call from his contact in the county roads department. Dice paused. There's equipment on the road. Sheriff's Department vehicles. Multiple units. Jim was very still. Blocking the road. Blocking the road. They have no legal authority to block the route, Jim said immediately. The permit is reinstated. The road closure is authorized. Any physical blockade is... I know, Dice said. I'm just telling you what's there. Jim looked at the staging area at 441 people who had come from across the state for a legal permitted peaceful event. At Richie Torres, whose bike had been damaged in the SWAT raid and who had worked through 2 nights to get it running in time for today. At Sandra Reeves, who had driven 400 miles. At the rider from San Diego who knew about being left behind. Call Marcus, Jim said. Already did. He's on his way to the route entry point. He has the permit, documentation, and the TRO. He says if there's a blockade, he's going to serve the documents directly to whoever's in charge on the scene. Tell him to wait for me, Jim said. He turned to Dice. Hold the formation here. Nobody moves until I come back. Jim. Hold the formation, Jim said again quietly. Trust me. He drove alone to the Highway 9 route entry point, which took 11 minutes and felt like considerably longer. He saw it from half a mile away and understood immediately that Whitmore had committed fully. This was not a symbolic gesture, not a single cruiser parked sideways across a lane. There were 4 Sheriff's Department vehicles blocking both lanes of the Highway 2 County Road, maintenance trucks positioned behind them, and 4 officers in full gear standing at the line. Above, and this was the part that told him everything about how Whitmore was thinking, a department helicopter was making slow circles overhead. He was expecting cameras. He'd positioned the helicopter for the footage. Jim parked behind Marcus's car, where Marcus was standing with a folder of documents in his hand and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and took 30 seconds to just look at the blockade before saying anything. "He's here," Jim asked. "In the 3rd vehicle," Marcus said quietly. "I can see him." Jim looked at the 3rd vehicle. Couldn't see clearly through the window, but he believed it. "Who's the officer at the line?" "Garland Pruitt." Jim turned and looked at Marcus. "Garland Pruitt is standing at that line." "Yes." "Not one of his people, Garland himself." "Yes." Jim looked back at the blockade. Something about that detail was important, and he wasn't certain yet what it meant. Garland had called Darcy Cho. Garland had sent Marcus the text about the LLC records. Garland had been a deputy for 18 years, and now Garland was standing at the line that his sheriff had put up. "Let me go talk to him," Jim said. "Jim? Alone, let me go talk to Garland." Marcus looked at him for a moment. "Then don't give him anything he can use." "I won't." Jim paused. "And Marcus, whatever happens in the next 20 minutes, document every second of it." He walked toward the line. He walked steadily and without hurry, hands visible, nothing in them. The same way he'd been trained decades ago to approach a situation where the weapons were assumed. The 4 officers watched him come. He didn't look at the 3 he didn't know. He looked at Garland. Garland looked older than the last time Jim had seen him up close. There was something around his eyes, not exhaustion exactly, but the particular look of a man who has been carrying something for a while and is near the end of what he can carry. "Deputy Pruitt," Jim said, stopping a few feet from the line. "Mr. Caulfield," Garland said. They looked at each other for a moment. "You know what's in the folder Marcus is holding?" Jim said. It wasn't a question. "I know what's in it," Garland said. "Then you know this blockade isn't legal." "I know the permit was reinstated by federal court order," Garland said. "Yes." "So we both know what this is," Jim said, "and we both know what happens if it continues." Garland held his gaze. His face was doing something complicated, the face of a man who has arrived at a place he knew was coming and is not surprised to be here, only surprised by how it feels to actually be standing in it. "What do you want me to do?" Garland asked quietly. The question was not rhetorical. It was genuine, with the weight of someone asking not for instructions, but for permission to do what they had already decided. Jim looked at him. "I want you to do what's right," he said. "I think you already know what that is." The door of the 3rd vehicle opened. Whitmore came out with the bearing of a man who had choreographed his own entrance. Straight posture, dress, uniform, the camera-ready gravity of someone who has been preparing this moment for days. He walked to the line without looking at Jim, which was itself a choice. A small performance of dominance, looking at the horizon, looking at the assembled equipment, looking anywhere but the man who had walked up to his barricade unarmed and calm. Then he looked at Jim, and Jim looked at him. The helicopter circled overhead. The cameras 2 local news crews had followed the sheriff's vehicle convoy and set up at the perimeter were rolling. This was the moment Whitmore had designed. The footage he'd wanted, the image that would play on the news. Sheriff stands firm at the line, motorcycle gang on one side, law and order on the other. He had not accounted for the fact that Jim Caulfield was not interested in playing his assigned role. "Mr. Caulfield," Whitmore said. His voice carried the easy authority of a man on his own stage. "I'm going to ask you to turn your people around. The county has determined that the public safety risk associated with this event—" "Sheriff," Jim said. His voice was quiet, conversational. The kind of voice that carries in silence because it doesn't need volume. "I have a federal court order in the hands of my legal representative reinstating our permit. I have documentation of every step of this process. And I have 441 riders waiting 2 miles back on a road they have the legal right to use." He paused. "I'm asking you officially and on record to remove this blockade so they can exercise that right." Whitmore's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm exercising my authority." "You don't have the authority," Jim said simply. "The federal court has already ruled on that. Whatever you do in the next 5 minutes is going to be in direct violation of a federal court order, which means it's not a local law enforcement matter anymore." He let that settle. "I think you know that." The cameras were rolling. The helicopter circled. Garland Pruitt was standing very still at the line, not looking at either of them. looking at something in the middle distance that might have been nothing, or might have been the last 18 years of his career played out in front of him like a movie he'd already seen. Whitmore took 2 steps toward Jim, reducing the distance between them to something more intimate, something that on camera would read as dominance but in person felt more like a man trying to figure out his next line and not finding it quickly enough. "You want to play this game?" Whitmore said lower now, not for the cameras. "You think you've got something on me? You think your little paralegal found something that's going to—" "I don't think anything," Jim said equally low. "I know, and so do the people I've been talking to in Sacramento." Whitmore went very still. "Remove the barricade, Sheriff," Jim said. "Let them ride. That's all this needs to be." "Or," Whitmore said, and the word came out smaller than he'd intended. "Or the sealed envelope Marcus is carrying gets delivered to the federal agents who are currently parked 2 blocks from here," Jim said. "And your Saturday afternoon becomes considerably more complicated than a blocked highway." He held Whitmore's gaze. "Move the barricade. Let a child's charity run happen. Walk away from this with whatever is left of your reputation intact." He paused. "That's the offer. It doesn't get better." The silence between them lasted 9 seconds. Jim counted. He watched it happen, watched the calculation move across Whitmore's face in real time, stripped of the performance layer for just long enough to be visible. The political calculation, the legal calculation, the personal calculation of a man who had been building something for years and could feel it becoming unsteady under his feet. The weight of the helicopter overhead, the cameras at the perimeter, the 441 people 2 miles back on a road they had the legal right to use. And Garland Pruitt standing at the line not looking at either of them. Whitmore turned. Jim watched him turn, watched him look at the blockade he'd built and the camera crews he'd invited and the helicopter he had ordered overhead for the footage of his moment of triumph. Watched him understand that the footage being taken right now was not the footage he'd designed. He said something to Garland that Jim couldn't hear. Garland nodded once. Then he turned to the 3 officers at the line and said something brief and direct. And the 3 officers looked at each other and then began moving the vehicles. The snowplows trucks rolled backward. The cruisers pulled to the shoulder. Highway 9 opened up in front of Jim like a thing that had always been there and had just been temporarily forgotten. Jim pulled out his phone and called Dice. "Move the formation," he said. "We're clear." Then he walked back to his truck and sat in it for a moment and let his hands rest on the steering wheel and breathed. Just breathed. His phone rang. "Marcus." "I saw it happen from here," Marcus said. "Are you all right?" "Yes," Jim said. "What did you give them?" "Nothing yet," Marcus said. "You were in there before I had a chance." A pause. "What did you say to him?" "The truth," Jim said. "Which part?" "All of it." Jim looked out the windshield at the open highway. "The agents are really there." "Yes," Marcus said. "Kim confirmed it this morning. 2 vehicles plainclothes positioned to observe." "Did they see everything?" "They saw everything." Jim was quiet for a moment. "How fast does this move now?" "Kim called me 12 minutes ago," Marcus said, and his voice had changed the careful flatness of a man reporting something significant while trying not to show how significant it feels. "She said the envelope, when the time comes, should be delivered directly to her, not through the mail. She gave me a direct address." A pause. "Jim, she said the time is going to come sooner than we expected." The first bike came over the rise a quarter-mile back, Dice riding point. The formation spreading out behind him across the road like a river finding its course. 441 engines. The sound of it reached Jim in his truck before the sight of it was fully clear, a low, rolling thunder that filled the morning and kept growing. Jim got out of the truck and stood on the shoulder of Highway 9 and watched them come. They rode in silence. Not the silence of something suppressed, but the silence of something earned, the silence of people who had waited and disciplined themselves and refused every provocation and arrived on this road anyway on this morning for this reason. They rode in tight formation, 2 by 2, and they passed him on the shoulder where he stood, and some of them nodded at him, and some raised a hand, and some just rode eyes forward already in the moment. Richie Torres came past on the bike he'd stayed up two nights to repair, and he caught Jim's eye and held it for a moment. And in that moment, everything that had happened, the SWAT raid, the broken windows, The damaged bikes, the press conferences, and the permit battles, and the long cold nights of building a case and holding a line, all of it was in that look held for 2 seconds and then released as Richie rode forward and the formation kept coming. Jim watched all 441 of them pass. He stood on the shoulder and watched every single one, and when the last rider went by and the road was moving and the sound was a receding thunder rolling toward the county fairgrounds, he got in his truck and followed. 2 miles back, Whitmore's vehicles were still on the shoulder of Highway 9. Whitmore himself had gotten back in the third cruiser immediately after giving Garland the order, and Garland had watched the cruiser sit there motionless while the formation passed, and he had stood at the shoulder and watched the formation too. 441 bikes going past in the morning light with an expression on his face that the camera crews who were still rolling captured but did not understand. It was the expression of a man watching something he had been part of preventing and was watching happen anyway and being despite everything glad. He drove back to the station afterward. Whitmore's cruiser peeled off before they reached the building. He didn't say where he was going, and Garland didn't ask. Garland parked, went inside, sat at his desk, and opened his personal phone. He composed a text to Darcy Cho. It said, "It's time. Whatever you have, use it." He put the phone down and looked at his desk and the framed commendation on the wall and the 18 years of his life that had led him here. He thought about what came next, about the conversations he would need to have, the things he would need to say, the things he would need to answer for the version of what he'd been a part of that he would have to be honest about, even when honest was hard. He thought about his grandkids. He thought about Lily Danvers, 41 pounds, gap-toothed, dark-eyed, asking her mother if the motorcycle men were really going to help. He opened his desk and took out the personal phone again and dialed a number from memory, one he had never used before, had been given 18 months ago at a department training seminar, and held on to with the vague, half-conscious awareness that a day might come when he needed it. The line rang twice. Then a woman's voice, FBI Sacramento Field Office. "My name is Garland Pruitt," he said. "I'm a deputy sheriff in Oak Haven County. I need to speak with Agent Sandra Kim. Tell her I was the one standing at the line this morning." He paused. "She'll know what that means." He waited. At the county fairgrounds, the formation was arriving. The sound of 441 engines coming down the approach road brought people to the perimeter who hadn't known the run was happening, and they stopped and watched, and the watching spread, and by the time the first riders were entering the fairgrounds, the crowd that had gathered at the finish area, families, locals, people who had followed the story on the news and driven out to witness the end of it, was 300 people deep and still growing. Carol Danvers was at the fairgrounds. Marisol had driven her, and Lily was with them. Lily in the passenger seat, which she never got to sit in, which was why she'd been excited about it since 6:30 in the morning. She was wearing a yellow dress and had her hair in 2 braids, and she had asked 17 questions on the drive over about motorcycles and why they were loud, and whether the men on them were nice, and whether there would be food. When the first bikes came into the fairgrounds, and Lily heard the sound of all of them together, not one or two, but hundreds, a rolling, continuous sound that filled everything. She looked at her mother with eyes wide open and said without any qualification, "Mom, that's so cool." And Carol laughed a real laugh, the kind she hadn't had in months, and put her arm around her daughter and said, "Yeah, baby, it really is." Jim parked and walked to the finish area and found Carol and Lily in the crowd. He crouched down to Lily's level because that was the appropriate thing to do when speaking to a 6-year-old, and he said, "You must be Lily." Lily looked at him with the frank, appraising directness that children under 8 use on strangers. "You're Big Jim," she said. He was momentarily surprised. "Where'd you hear that?" "Mom told me." She studied him. "You don't look that big." Behind her, Carol made a sound that was trying very hard not to be a laugh. "I get that a lot," Jim said. He held out his hand, which Lily shook with the formal gravity of someone who had been taught that handshakes were important. "Are you having a good morning?" "Yes," Lily said. "There's a lot of motorcycles." "There are. Are they all here for me?" Jim looked at her for a moment. "Every single one," he said. Lily considered this information. She looked out at the arriving formation, at the hundreds of riders coming through the fairgrounds entrance, and she was quiet for a moment with the expression of a child processing something that exceeds her current frameworks for understanding the world. Then she looked back at Jim and said with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone who has decided something, "I'm going to get better." Jim held her gaze. "Yes," he said, "you are." He stood up. Carol was looking at him with the particular expression of a mother who has just watched a stranger say exactly the right thing to her child and is not sure how to hold the gratitude for it. How much, she asked quietly, because that was the practical question, and Carol Danvers was at her core a practical woman. We'll count it this afternoon, Jim said. But based on what Marcus has been tracking from the vendor tables and the pre-registrations and the online, he stopped. He didn't want to tell her a number that turned out to be wrong in the wrong direction. It's enough, he said. I'm confident it's enough. Carol looked at him. How confident? Very, he said, and meant it. 50 yards away under the hospitality tent, at the edge of the finish area, Marcus Webb was sitting at a folding table with a laptop and a phone and 3 separate tallying systems running simultaneously because he was the kind of person who did not trust a single system when the stakes were this high. He had the vendor totals and the registration fees and the online donation tracker, and he was watching all 3 in real time as the numbers moved. His phone rang. Kim's number. He answered immediately. "Tell me you're somewhere you can talk," she said. "I'm at the fairgrounds. I can step away." "Do it." He walked to the edge of the tent away from the noise. "I'm clear." "Garland Pruitt called us this morning," Kim said. "He's agreed to cooperate fully. He's been offered protection and he's accepted." A pause. "Marcus, he has documentation we didn't know existed. Internal correspondence between Whitmore and the county judge who signed the SWAT warrant. Emails. He's been holding them for 3 months." Marcus was very still. 3 months, he said. "He's been building toward this for 3 months," Kim said. "He just needed to see which way it was going to go." Another pause. "With Pruitt's documentation and what you've compiled in the incident this morning on Highway 9, we have enough to move. We're moving." "When soon," she said. "Not today, but soon." She paused. "How's the run going?" "Good," Marcus said. The vendor tables were visible from where he stood, lines of people donation jars filling merchandise, selling the specific cheerful noise of a thing working as intended. "It's going very well." "Good," Kim said. "Let it be a good day. You've earned it." He hung up and stood at the edge of the tent for a moment, looking out at the fairgrounds at the 441 riders who had made it through a blocked highway to stand on this ground at the crowd of strangers who had come to witness something that mattered at Carol and Lily 30 yards away, with Lily's hand in her mother's, and both of them looking out at the sea of bikes with expressions that were each in their own way, something close to the release of a breath held for a very long time. Marcus walked back to his table and sat down and looked at his 3 tallying systems and let himself very quietly exhale. The numbers were moving fast, faster than projected, faster than anything he'd calculated. He picked up his phone and called Jim. "I have early numbers," he said when Jim answered. "Tell me." Marcus looked at the screen, looked at it again to be sure. "We're going to hit the goal," he said. "We're going to clear it." The silence on Jim's end lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then Jim said, "By how much?" "I won't know final until this afternoon," Marcus said. "But Jim," he paused, "it's going to be enough. It's going to be more than enough." Another pause. When Jim spoke again, his voice was the voice of a man who has been holding something for weeks and is very carefully setting it down. "Tell the vendors to keep going," he said. "Every dollar past the goal goes to the next family that needs it." "Already planned for it," Marcus said. "Good." A pause. "Marcus?" "Yeah. Thank you." Marcus looked at his laptop screen at the numbers still moving at the thing they had built out of legal filings and financial records, and 441 people who had decided to show up on a Sunday morning. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "We still have things to finish." "I know," Jim said, "but right now, right this second, thank you." Marcus allowed himself one moment. Just one. Then, "Go be with your people," he said. "I'll handle the numbers." The day moved forward in the way that days do when they are carrying more than one kind of significance fast in the parts that mattered slow, in the parts you wanted to keep and over before you were quite ready for it to be. The run finished. The tallies ran. The afternoon came in warm and ordinary over the Oak Haven County Fairgrounds, and somewhere in Sacramento in a federal field office with bland furniture and fluorescent lights, in a case file with a deliberately boring title, Agent Sandra Kim was reading Garland Pruitt's 3 months of carefully preserved internal correspondence and building a timeline, that was going to require multiple defendants in several different charge categories, and the kind of prosecution that did not happen quietly. But that was for later. Right now at the fairgrounds, a 6-year-old girl named Lily Danvers was sitting on the back of a parked motorcycle, a large, beautifully maintained machine that belonged to Richie Torres, who was standing 2 feet away with his arms crossed in the expression of a man who is pretending to be indifferent about something he is absolutely not indifferent about. And she was making engine sounds with her mouth while her mother took a photograph. "Vroom," Lily said with complete commitment. "Vroom," Richie agreed gravely. Jim stood nearby and watched and said nothing because there was nothing to say that the moment was not already saying better. The final tally came in at 4:17 in the afternoon, and Marcus sat with it for 60 seconds before he called anyone because he needed the 60 seconds to make sure he was reading it correctly and not making the kind of mistake that hope manufactures in tired men. He was not making a mistake. $312,440. That was the number. Vendor tables registration fees. Merchandise, the online fundraiser that had been running parallel for a week, in a single anonymous wire transfer of $25,000 that had appeared in the chapter's charity account at 2 in the afternoon from a source that listed only a post office box in Nevada, an origin that Marcus looked at for a long moment before deciding that some things did not require investigation. He called Jim first. Jim was still at the fairgrounds helping Roadblock supervise the breakdown of the vendor infrastructure with the particular hands-on efficiency of a man who did not believe in asking people to do work he wouldn't do himself. He had his phone in his back pocket, and when it rang and he saw Marcus's name, he stepped away from the tent pole he was carrying and answered. $312,000, Marcus said. $440. Jim stood very still on the fairgrounds grass. Around him, the breakdown continued. Voices, the sound of equipment being folded and loaded the tail end of the afternoon. He looked at none of it. "Say it again," he said. Marcus said it again. Jim looked up at the sky, which was doing nothing remarkable, which was the right thing for the sky to be doing right now because everything else was already more than enough. "Transfer it to the Seattle account," he said. "All of it tonight." "Already set up," Marcus said. "I'll execute it within the hour." "And the surplus, $62,440 above the treatment bond," Marcus said. "I'll hold it in the charity account pending your direction." "We'll talk about it Monday," Jim said. "Tonight, just get the money to Seattle." "Understood." A pause. "Jim, Carol needs to know." "I'm going to her now," Jim said. He found Carol at the edge of the fairgrounds where she and Marisol and Lily had retreated from the main crowd to a quieter stretch of grass. Lily had fallen asleep sitting upright against Marisol's shoulder, her yellow dress slightly grass-stained, her braids coming undone at the ends with the absolute completeness of a child who has had a big day and made no negotiation with exhaustion. Carol was sitting beside them with her knees drawn up and her arms around them, looking out at the activity on the grounds. She saw Jen coming from 30 yards away, and she read something in the way he walked, not urgency, something different, and she got to her feet before he reached her. He stopped 2 feet from her and said, "We cleared it. We cleared the goal." Carol looked at him. Her face went through something that was not one thing, but several things in very rapid succession. Something that clenched and then opened, clenched and opened like a fist releasing a grip it had maintained for so long the muscles didn't quite know what to do without it. "How much?" she said. $62,000 over, Jim said. "The treatment is fully funded. The transfer goes to Seattle tonight." Carol put her hand over her mouth. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was involuntary. The body's response to a feeling that needed somewhere to go. She stood like that for 3 seconds, and Jim did not say anything because there was nothing appropriate to say in 3 seconds like those except nothing. Then she took her hand away from her mouth and looked at him and said in a voice that was completely steady, in the particular way of something that has passed through the shaking and come out the other side, "She's going to be okay." "She's going to be okay," Jim said. Carol looked at her daughter sleeping against Marisol's shoulder, 41 pounds, yellow dress, grass-stained braids undone. She looked at her for a long time. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You don't have to," Jim said. "I need to," she said. "I need you to understand that you—" She stopped. Started again. 8 months I've been alone with this. 8 months. And I kept thinking there was going to be some moment where I finally couldn't hold it anymore, where I ran out of whatever it is you run on when you have no other options. She paused. And then a man I didn't know showed up at my diner counter and told me it was going to be okay. And I didn't know if I believed him. She looked at Jim. I believe him now. Jim looked at her for a moment. He was not a man who showed much, but something in his face was less guarded than usual. Not open exactly, but accessible. You held it together, he said. For 8 months, that was you. You gave me something to hold it together for, she said. They stood there for a moment in the quiet of that, the late afternoon light going warm over the fairgrounds, Lily asleep on Marisol's shoulder. Then Marisol, who had been listening to all of this with her eyes partly closed in the manner of someone pretending not to said, without opening them fully, someone should probably tell the internet. Carol made a sound that was almost a laugh. Jim looked at Marisol with something approaching gratitude. That someone is Marcus, he said. He handles the internet. He left them there, Carol sitting back down on the grass beside her daughter. The tension in her shoulders, something he could see even from a distance, beginning very slowly to release, and walked to his truck and sat in it and called his daughter Grace at her mother's house. Grace answered, which surprised him. Usually his ex-wife picked up first. Dad, Grace said, Hey, Bug, you okay? I'm at Tyler's birthday party, but I left to answer because Mom said it might be you, she said with a particular willingness to explain logistics that 7-year-olds default to. Tell Tyler happy birthday from me, Jim said. I will. Are you done with the motorcycle thing? Yeah, Bug, we're done. Did it work? Grace asked with the directness of someone who had not yet learned to soften a question. Did you raise the money for the sick girl? We did, Jim said. We raised more than enough. There was a pause on Grace's end, and in the pause he could hear the birthday party sounds, music and kids, and the specific orchestrated chaos of 7-year-olds in the same space. Good, Grace said. And then because she was 7 and honest, I'm going back to the party now. Go, Jim said. Have fun, Bug. She hung up. Jim sat in his truck in the fairgrounds parking area and let the quiet settle around him and thought about his daughter going back to a birthday party and Lily sleeping on a grass-stained yellow dress and the $312,000 moving through a digital channel towards Seattle, and felt for the first time in many weeks something that was not the next problem to solve. He let it last for a few minutes. Then he drove to Marcus's apartment because there was still, as Marcus had said, things to finish. In the county administration building, Whitmore had not returned after the highway incident. His cruiser had been logged back to the department at 11:45. Someone had driven it in, though the log noted it was not Whitmore himself, and his office had been locked since then. Calls to his direct line went to voicemail. His cell went to voicemail. His home number rang without answer. Garland Pruitt noted all of this from his desk with the careful attention of a man who is documenting a situation he expects to need documentation of later. He had been at his desk since returning from the highway, doing his job with methodical focus, answering calls, managing the afternoon shift, handling the routine business of a county sheriff's department on a Sunday while the larger architecture of everything changed around him in ways that were mostly invisible to the officers and staff who moved through the building. At 3 in the afternoon, his personal phone buzzed. A text from Agent Kim's number. We'll need you in Sacramento Monday morning. 9 a.m. Can you be there? He looked at the text for a moment. Then he typed, yes. He put the phone back in his pocket and returned to the shift log he was updating and thought about 18 years of mornings in this building. The first morning nervous and certain he was doing something meaningful, and all the mornings after it, the slow accumulation of small compromises and deliberate avoidances and things he had told himself were not his to fix even when he knew they were. He thought about the moment he had given Garland the order to move the barricade, and Garland had read something in it, not repentance, not weakness, something more complex than either, and moved the vehicles. He had made the call to Kim before Whitmore's cruiser was back in the lot. He needed that detail to be part of the record. Darcy Cho published her story at 6 o'clock Sunday evening. She had been holding it for 4 days on Kim's request, holding it with the professional discipline of a journalist who understands that the right story at the right time is worth more than the same story published too early and half-formed. In 4 days, with access to what Marcus had compiled and the additional material that had come through the public records request, and 2 sources she was not naming, she had built something considerably more complete than the story she'd originally been pursuing. The headline was measured. The content was not. She documented the asset forfeiture chain, the seized properties, the Nevada LLCs, the connections to Whitmore's donor network. She documented the no-bid contracts and the campaign finance irregularities. She included the SWAT raid on the clubhouse, the fabricated tip, the damage to private property. She documented the highway blockade, the federal court order, the order's violation, and the subsequent stand-down. She included a statement from Marcus Webb that was 3 sentences long and factually immaculate. She included a statement from Garland Pruitt, identified as a current department deputy speaking on record, which was the detail that told anyone who understood these things how significant his cooperation was. That said, I have reason to believe that actions taken by this office in connection with the Angels Run charity event were not consistent with legal law enforcement authority, and I have made myself available to appropriate oversight bodies. She did not include a statement from Whitmore because Whitmore had not responded to 12 separate requests for comment made over 4 days. The story went online at 6 and within 90 minutes had been picked up by 3 regional outlets and 2 national digital publications. By 8 o'clock, it was on the cable news cycle. By 10, it was on every feed that the story had touched in the past 2 weeks and a significant number that it hadn't. Marcus read it in full at 6:15 at his kitchen table with a glass of water he kept forgetting to drink. He called Darcy when he finished. "It's good," he said. "It's very good." "Thanks," she said, and her voice had the particular quality of someone who is managing their own feeling about their work by staying professional. "I need to ask you something." "Ask." "The anonymous tip that sent the SWAT team to your clubhouse. Do you know where it came from?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "No." "I have a theory," Darcy said. "I'm not going to help you confirm a theory about an ongoing federal investigation," Marcus said. "Fair," she said. "Off the record, do you think it holds up?" "Off the record," Marcus said. "I think the next few days are going to answer more questions than either of us currently knows to ask." He paused. "You did good work, Darcy." "You gave me the thread," she said. "You knew how to pull it." He hung up and finished his water and went to his desk and opened his laptop and looked at the case file he'd been building for 3 weeks. The documents, the financial records, the property, traces, the notes, the timeline, and began organizing it into the format that Kim had specified when she'd given him the submission protocol. He worked until 1 in the morning, which was not unusual for him, and when he finished, he backed it up in 3 places and sent the final package to Kim's secure address and sat in the quiet of his apartment with the specific stillness of a man who has finished something long and difficult and is feeling the shape of what the finished thing is. Jim called him at 1:15, which told Marcus that Jim was also awake. "The story's out," Marcus said. "I saw it," Jim said. "Darcy did it right." "She did." A pause. "Jim, I want to tell you something. When this is all finished, when the investigation runs its course and the prosecution happens, and all of it, I don't want any of the credit." Jim was quiet for a moment. "What does that mean?" "It means the stories about Lily and the run and what this community did. It's not about—" Marcus paused. "I don't need to be the man who brought down a corrupt sheriff. I just need it to be done." Jim was quiet for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because it's going to be tempting for people to make it about the investigation," Marcus said. "And I need you to help make sure it stays about the right thing." "You know it's both," Jim said. "The run and the investigation. You can't separate them." "You can emphasize one over the other," Marcus said. "Then we emphasize the child," Jim said simply. "That was always the point." "Yeah," Marcus said. "It was." They hung up, and both of them presumably went to bed, though neither of them slept particularly well, because the Monday that was coming was not a Monday either of them could fully see the shape of yet, and uncertain Mondays are not conducive to rest. Monday arrived fast and without ceremony. Kim's team in Sacramento was in the building by 7. Garland Pruitt was in a conference room in the federal field office by 9, sitting across from Kim and a second agent named Torres, who took notes with the economical precision of someone who had done this many times, and for the next 4 hours he talked. He talked about what he'd seen and what he'd been asked to do and what he'd done and what he'd refused to do. He talked about the SWAT warrant and the county judge who had signed it and the relationship between that judge and Whitmore that Garland had observed over 3 years. He talked about the asset forfeiture records he had personally seen handled in ways that were not consistent with department policy or state law. He talked about the day he had driven the permit revocation notice to the chapter's P.O. box and known before he was back in his car that he was delivering something that was legally indefensible. He talked for 4 hours, and when he was done, he felt something that he couldn't name precisely, not relieved exactly, not light exactly, but something that was the opposite of the weight he'd been carrying 4 months. Like putting a heavy pack down after a long walk. Like finally saying the thing you'd been working up to for longer than it should have taken. Kim thanked him. Not warmly, not coldly, professionally, the way people thank each other when the work is serious and the thanks is real. She told him the next steps. She told him what cooperation would look like going forward. She told him that his statement was significant. He drove back to Oak Haven in the early afternoon and went directly to the department. His office was as he'd left it. Whitmore's was still locked, which was now the subject of some open curiosity among the staff that Garland addressed by saying simply, "The sheriff is managing some personal matters. I'll be handling operations for the time being." Nobody asked more than that, which told Garland something about how much his people had known or suspected or chosen not to look at directly. Whitmore surfaced Monday afternoon through his attorney, who issued a statement saying the sheriff was consulting with legal counsel regarding recent developments and would have no further comment at this time. The statement was in the language of men who had practiced reading these statements, essentially at a confirmation that recent developments were significantly more serious than a blocked highway and a revoked permit. Paul Renner, the campaign consultant, had already issued his own statement by noon, a single paragraph announcing that he was no longer engaged with the Whitmore campaign, which in campaign world was the equivalent of a rat leaving a ship that was not yet technically sinking, but was going down by the bow. The county supervisors, 3 of whom had signed letters of support for the Angels Run permit just weeks ago, held a quiet emergency session Monday afternoon and voted to initiate an independent audit of the asset forfeiture records for the past 4 years. The vote was unanimous. The auditors they contracted were from a firm in San Francisco that specialized in government financial irregularities and had no prior relationship with anyone in Oak Haven County. Marcus heard about the audit at 4 in the afternoon from a source he wouldn't name, and he called Jim immediately. "The supervisors just ordered an independent audit," he said. Jim was at the garage back to the ordinary business of a Monday, and he set down the parts list he'd been reviewing. "How fast?" "Firm's already been contracted. They're in the county records room tomorrow morning." A pause. "Jim wants the auditors start pulling the same threads I pulled, but with full legal authority and a forensic accountant. This is going to move fast. The evidence isn't hidden well. It was hidden from casual observation, but not from scrutiny." "Whitmore knows that," Jim said. "Yes," Marcus said, "which is why I'm a little surprised he hasn't." He stopped. "Hasn't what?" "Hasn't done something more dramatic," Marcus said carefully. "Men in his position, when the accounting comes, some of them go quiet and lawyer up, which is the smart play. Some of them don't." Jim was quiet for a moment. "You think he's going to do something?" "I think he's a man who has been building an identity, a political identity, a public identity for his entire adult life. And that identity is in the process of collapsing. And I think some men, when that happens, don't react rationally." "What does irrational look like for someone with his resources?" "I don't know," Marcus said. "That's what worries me." Jim thought about that for a moment. About Whitmore and the 3rd Cruiser on Highway 9 not coming out to face the formation, sending Garland to the line instead. About the press conferences and the manufactured outrage and the SWAT raid, all of it, the behavior of a man reacting, not planning. Reactive men with cornered animal energy were not predictable in the ways that mattered. "I'm going to call Kim," Jim said. "She's already aware," Marcus said. "She told me this morning she has people watching." "Where is he right now?" "His attorney's office, as of 2 hours ago," Marcus said. "After that, I don't know." "Keep trying to know," Jim said. He hung up and stood in the garage for a moment thinking. Then he picked up his keys and drove to the diner on Sycamore Street, not because Carol was in any specific danger, but because something in him needed to account for the people in this story who were not part of the law enforcement apparatus, who were not protected by the invisible presence of federal agents in unmarked vehicles, who were simply a woman and a child in a diner on a Monday afternoon. The dinner rush hadn't started yet. The diner was at the quiet hour between shifts, 3 tables occupied with lingering afternoon customers. Carol was behind the counter doing prep for the evening with the focused efficiency of someone who had nowhere to be but here for the next 4 hours. She looked up when Jim came in. "2 visits in 1 week," she said. "I'm starting to think you like the coffee." I do like the coffee, he said, which was true, and sat at the counter. She poured without being asked. Something wrong? No, he said. Then because it was Carol and she deserved honesty, I don't know yet. Probably no. He wrapped his hands around the cup. I just wanted to check in. She looked at him with the particular assessing look of a woman who has been reading people across a counter for 11 years. It's Whitmore, she said. He's lawyered up. He's quiet. You wanted to make sure we were okay. Yes. Carol looked at him for a moment. Then she set the coffee pot down and leaned against the counter, not the posture of a woman concerned, but the posture of a woman who has decided to be direct. Jim, whatever he does or doesn't do, I've been scared for 8 months. Real scared. The kind where you lie awake at 3 in the morning and you can't breathe all the way in because if you breathe all the way in, you'll feel how bad it actually is. She paused. That's over. Maybe things happen, maybe there's more to get through, but the fear is different now. It's not the same animal. She picked up the coffee pot again. We're okay. Jim looked at her. He believed her, which meant something because he was good at knowing when to believe people. The Seattle appointment's been confirmed, he asked. Thursday, she said. We fly out Wednesday morning. The treatment program confirmed our slot when the transfer went through last night. She paused. Lily keeps asking if she can send the motorcycle men a postcard from Seattle. Jim almost smiled. Tell her yes. She wants to send one to you specifically, Carol said. I told her I'd have to get the address. Jim took a napkin from the dispenser and borrowed a pen from the cup beside the register and wrote the chapter's Route 7 address in his large, clear handwriting. He slid the napkin across the counter. Carol looked at it and folded it, put it in her apron pocket. Thank you, she said, for what might have been the 100th time in the past 2 weeks, but felt this time like it was carrying all of them. Have a good night, Jim said. He left enough cash on the counter to cover the coffee 3 times over and walked back out to the evening street. Whitmore made his move Tuesday morning. He had apparently spent Monday night at his attorney's office, a detail that came out later as many details do in a timeline constructed from surveillance footage and cell phone records, and the testimony of people who had been in the building. He had arrived at his attorney's office at 3 in the afternoon Monday and had not left. His attorney, a man named Gerald Cross, who had represented Whitmore since his first campaign, had apparently spent most of those hours arguing against what Whitmore intended to do next. He hadn't argued hard enough, or Whitmore hadn't listened, which amounted to the same thing. At 7 Tuesday morning, Whitmore walked into the county administration building wearing his full-dress uniform, which was itself a tell because Tuesday mornings were not occasions for dress uniform, and went directly to his office and unlocked it for the first time since Sunday. His assistant, a woman named Phyllis, who had been with the department for 12 years, told investigators later that he had seemed calm in a way that was different from his usual calm, not the practiced composure of a man performing confidence, but something quieter and more settled, the calm of someone who has made a decision and is no longer negotiating with themselves about it. He spent 40 minutes in his office alone. He made 3 calls that would later be traced, one to his wife, which lasted 11 minutes, one to his attorney, which lasted 3, and one to his oldest daughters, which lasted the 22 minutes, and which nobody who later reviewed the record could bring themselves to characterize as anything other than a goodbye call. He left the office at 7:50. He drove to the county fairgrounds, the same fairgrounds where 441 bikes had crossed the finish line 2 days before, where Lily Danvers had sat on Richie Torres' motorcycle and made engine sounds with her mouth, and he parked and walked to the center of the main field and sat down on the grass. He was there for 40 minutes before anyone noticed. It was a groundskeeper who found him, or rather, who found a man in a sheriff's dress uniform sitting cross-legged on the fairgrounds grass at 8:30 in the morning, staring at the middle distance, which was unusual enough to warrant a call to the department. Garland took the call. He drove there himself. He found Whitmore where the groundskeeper had described, sitting on the grass, not distressed in any visible way, not doing anything, just sitting. His uniform was intact, his badge was pinned, his gun was in its holster and had not been touched. There was no dramatic gesture being staged. There was just a man who had come to an open field on a Tuesday morning and sat down, and Garland looked at him for a moment from 20 yards away before walking over. Blake, Garland said. Whitmore looked up. Garland. His voice was normal. His face was normal. I assume you know. I know enough, Garland said carefully. He sat down on the grass beside him, which was not a thing he had planned to do, but which felt like the only appropriate response to a man who was sitting in the middle of a field, not going anywhere. "I'm going to surrender," Whitmore said, "to the federal agents, not to my own department." He paused. "I need you to make the call." Garland looked at him. "Right now?" "Yes." "Do you have counsel present?" "I called Gerald," Whitmore said. "He's on his way." Garland looked at the fairgrounds around them. The empty space, the morning light, the vendor tent stakes still in the ground from Sunday. "Why here?" he asked. "Why did you come here?" Whitmore was quiet for a moment. He looked at the grass. "I needed to see it," he said, "what it looked like when it was empty." Garland didn't ask what he meant. He understood well enough. He took out his personal phone and called Kim's number. She answered on the second ring. "He's here," Garland said. "He wants to surrender directly to your office. His counsel is on the way." He gave her the location. "He's cooperative. He's calm." "We'll be there in 20 minutes, Kim said. Garland hung up and sat beside Whitmore in the grass for 20 minutes, without either of them saying much. Garland thought about the things he should say, about the 18 years, about the choices, about the way things like this accumulate in increments so small that each one is deniable until the accumulation becomes something that can't be. He thought about whether any of it needed to be said out loud, or whether the man beside him already knew all of it. He decided it didn't need to be said out loud. "Your kids," Garland said finally, "they know." "I told my daughter this morning," Whitmore said, "the oldest." A pause. "She's 23, she's smart, He stopped. "She told me she was glad I was turning myself in." His voice was controlled in the particular way of a man who is preventing something by force of will. "That's the thing I can't." He stopped again. Garland said nothing. There wasn't anything to say to that. Kim arrived in 15 minutes, not 20, which told Garland she'd been closer than Sacramento. 2 agents with her, both in plain clothes, both carrying themselves with the low-key professionalism of people who had done this specific thing many times and had learned that how you did it mattered. Gerald Cross arrived at almost the same moment from the other direction, and Kim gave him 3 minutes with his client before she approached. It was done quietly, on a grass field on a Tuesday morning with no cameras and no helicopters and no staged confrontation, which was, Garland thought, watching it exactly what this particular end deserved. He watched them walk Whitmore to the federal vehicle. He watched the door close. He watched the vehicle drive away, and he stood in the middle of the fairgrounds grass for a moment after it was gone, alone in the large quiet of the empty field, before walking back to his car and driving to the department and doing what needed to be done there. Jim heard about the surrender from Marcus at 11 o'clock Tuesday morning. He was at the garage. He sat down on a crate and listened to Marcus tell it, and when Marcus was done, he said nothing for several seconds. "Voluntary," he said. "Voluntary," Marcus confirmed. Walked in himself. Garland facilitated the contact. "Where'd it happen?" Marcus told him. Jim was quiet for another moment. "The fairgrounds," he said. "Yes." Another pause. "Is that?" Jim stopped. Tried again. "Do you know why he went there?" "Garland says he said he needed to see what it looked like when it was empty," Marcus said. "Make of that what you will." Jim made of it what he would, which was the fairgrounds on Sunday had been the moment Whitmore understood that the story had already been written without him in it. Not the highway blockade, not the federal court order, not even the corruption file. The fairgrounds. The 441 bikes and the crowd of strangers, and Lily Danvers sitting on a motorcycle making engine sounds. The thing that had happened in spite of him, rather than because of him, the thing that told him more clearly than any legal document that he had been wrong about what this was, who these people were, and what Oak Haven actually stood for. And he had gone back there to sit with it, in the empty. "What are the charges?" Jim asked. "Kim's office hasn't officially announced yet," Marcus said. "But based on what I've compiled and what Garland provided, RICO violations, money laundering through the asset forfeiture scheme, abuse of official capacity, conspiracy to obstruct a federal court order. Possibly more. The county auditors are in the records room right now, and whatever they find becomes additional evidentiary basis." "The county judge who signed the SWAT warrant," Jim said. "Under investigation," Marcus said. "Not charged yet, but under investigation." Jim sat on the crate in the garage with the phone in his hand and thought about the weight of it all. The weight, the whole accumulated mass of everything that had happened over the past 3 weeks. The permit application and the revocation and the federal filing and the SWAT raid and the highway blockade and the run in the money and the surrender on a Tuesday morning at a fairgrounds in the grass. He thought about Marcus and his 16 years of paralegal instincts and his 3 weeks of late nights building something in a back office. He thought about Garland Pruitt standing at the line on Highway 9 and making the call to the FBI before Whitmore's cruiser was back in the lot. He thought about the people who hadn't done the right thing for 18 years and then did, and what that was worth and wasn't worth, and how you held both of those things at the same time without losing the thread of what had mattered from the beginning. Marcus, he said, yeah. You okay? A pause, the pause of someone being asked a question they weren't expecting and aren't certain how to answer honestly. Yeah, Marcus said. I think I am. I'm tired. Another pause. Are you? Yeah, Jim said. I am. Good tired or bad tired? Jim thought about it. Good, he said. Definitely good. The federal charges were officially announced Wednesday morning, 12 hours before Carol and Lily boarded a 6:15 flight to Seattle. The charges were exactly what Marcus had predicted: RICO conspiracy, money laundering, abuse of official capacity, and obstruction of a federal court order. The press conference was held by Kim's supervisor. Kim herself was not visible, which was consistent with how she operated, and was covered live by 3 cable networks and every regional outlet that had touched the story in the past 3 weeks. Whitmore's name was spoken in the context of federal criminal charges at a press conference, while Carol Danvers was packing 2 suitcases in her apartment 8 blocks away. Lily sitting on the edge of the bed telling her what to pack and what not to pack, with the advisory authority of a 6-year-old who had been consulted on an important trip. Pack the sweater, Lily said. Seattle's cold. How do you know Seattle's cold? Carol asked. Marisol told me. Marisol's never been to Seattle. She looked it up, Lily said with the authority of someone reporting an impeccable source. Carol folded the sweater and put it in the suitcase and looked at her daughter on the edge of the bed. Yellow dress exchanged for pajamas. Braids exchanged for 2 lopsided pigtails that Carol had done herself because Lily had insisted, and felt the particular fullness of a moment that contains too much to hold all at once, and so you hold what you can and let the rest be peripheral. You ready for tomorrow? Carol asked. Yes, Lily said immediately. Are the doctors nice? They're supposed to be very nice. Better than Dr. Harris. The program in Seattle is one of the best in the country, Carol said carefully. Lily considered this. Dr. Harris gave me stickers, she said in a tone suggesting this was a relevant variable. I'll ask them about stickers, Carol said. Lily seemed satisfied with this. She looked at the suitcase. Did you pack my book? Which one? The one with the horses. Carol found the book on the nightstand and packed it. Lily watched the packing process with the focused attention of someone making sure nothing important was forgotten, and Carol worked through it with the practical love of a mother who has learned to let the ordinary rituals of packing and preparing and going carry the weight of what can't be said directly. Her phone buzzed on the dresser. She glanced at it, a text from Jim's number, which she hadn't heard from since Sunday. It said, safe travels. She's going to be okay. Tell Lily the bikes will be here when she gets back. Carol read it twice, put the phone face down, kept packing. Mom, Lily said, yeah. After Seattle, can we go see the motorcycles again? Carol looked at her daughter. Dark eyes, gap-toothed smile, 41 pounds. There were going to become more in the months ahead because the treatment was going to work, because the money was there, because 441 people had shown up on a Sunday morning, because a man she hadn't known before 2 weeks ago had walked into her diner and sat at the counter and refused to accept a story that ended badly. Yes, Carol said. We'll go see the motorcycles. Lily smiled the gap-toothed smile. Cool, she said with the serene satisfaction of someone who has gotten the answer they wanted and is done negotiating. Carol went back to packing, and outside the apartment window, Oak Haven moved through its Wednesday evening in the ordinary way: people in diners, people driving home, people going to sleep with the vague, unconscious assumption that the systems around them were basically honest. And it was tonight more true than it had been yesterday, which was as much as you could ask of any given evening. In the rebuilt clubhouse on Route 7, Jim sat at the long table after everyone had gone home and looked at the map with the 46 red tacks. He held a 47th tack in his hand. He looked at the map for a long time. Then he pressed the tack in. Not on a city, on Oak Haven itself, right on the dot of the town where they lived, where they had always lived, where a 6-year-old girl had needed saving, and they had shown up. He stood back and looked at it. 47 red tacks. 47 reasons. He turned off the lights and locked the door and drove home through the quiet town. And the night held everything, the charges and the surrender and the transfer to Seattle and the packed suitcase with the horse book and Lily's question about the sweater and Garland Pruitt sitting on the fairgrounds grass and 441 engines on Highway 9 in the morning light held all of it in the dark and the ordinary and the particular silence of a town that had been tested and had not in the end been found wanting. The postcard arrived on a Thursday 3 weeks after Carol and Lily had flown to Seattle. It came with the regular mail, a water bill, a coupon, circular, a magazine nobody at the clubhouse had subscribed to, and Dice found it in the P.O. box on Main Street and recognized the handwriting immediately because it was the handwriting of a child large and uneven and committed with the full pressure of someone who takes the physical act of writing seriously. The front had a photograph of the Seattle waterfront. The back had 9 words written in purple crayon. Dear Big Jim, I am getting better. Love, Lily. Dice drove to the clubhouse without stopping anywhere first, which was its own kind of message. Jim was at the workbench when Dice came through the door holding the postcard with the careful two-handed posture of someone transporting something that matters. He held it out without saying anything. Jim read it once, read it again, set it on the workbench and stood looking at it for a moment with his hands braced on the surface on either side of it, not moving, just reading those 9 words as if they required more than one pass to fully absorb, which in a way they did because the weight they were carrying was not proportional to their length. Dice stood nearby not talking, understanding without being told that this was one of those moments that needed its own space and didn't benefit from narration. She spelled my name right, Jim said finally. Lily, 6 years old, got the whole thing right. Carol probably helped, Dice said. Maybe, Jim said. Doesn't matter. He picked the postcard up and walked to the back of the clubhouse to the wall above the old symbol where the map with the 47 red tacks was pinned, and he reached into the drawer of the side table for a pushpin and pressed the postcard to the wall. Not over the map. To the right of it, in its own space where it could be seen clearly by anyone who stood in that room. He stepped back and looked at it. 9 words in purple crayon. Dear Big Jim, I am getting better. Love, Lily. Dice came and stood beside him. They looked at it together for a moment. That's the whole story right there, Dice said. Yeah, Jim said. It is. He left it there and went back to work because there was still work to be done and the postcard didn't change that it completed something, the way a period at the end of a long sentence completes it. But completion is not the same as ending. And Jim Caulfield had never been a man who confused the two. What happened in the weeks following Whitmore's surrender happened on multiple tracks simultaneously, the way consequences always do when they have been building for a long time and finally find their release. The federal investigation moved with the particular speed of a case where the evidence had been pre-assembled by people who knew what they were doing. Marcus's package and Garland's documentation and the county auditor's findings combined into a file that the federal prosecutor described in a later interview as the most organized pre-submission evidence package she had received from a non-law enforcement source in 14 years of prosecution. She said it as a compliment. Marcus, when it was reported back to him, said only, I had a lot of time, which was true and also not quite the point. The county judge who had signed the SWAT warrant was placed on administrative leave pending investigation within 10 days of Whitmore's surrender. The investigation of the judge was separate from the federal case against Whitmore, but fed from the same evidentiary pool, and the people who understood these things understood that administrative leave in this context was a way station, not a destination. 3 of the county contractors who had received no-bid contracts through Whitmore's network were audited. 2 of them hired attorneys the same day the audit was announced. The third, a man named Douglas Reese, who had been the principal investor in one of the shell companies Marcus had traced, flew to Costa Rica for what he described to his assistant as a personal wellness retreat, and did not return on the scheduled date, which created its own set of legal complications that the federal prosecutor added to her file with the brisk efficiency of someone adding a line to a list. The Nevada LLC, the one registered under Whitmore's mother-in-law's maiden name, was frozen by federal order within 2 weeks of the surrender. The assets it held, including the commercial property on Route 12 that had been Marcus's first thread, were placed in a federal receivership pending restitution proceedings. The county supervisors had already begun the process of determining what portion of the recovered assets would be returned to the county's general fund, which was where the stolen money had come from in the first place. Paul Renner, the campaign consultant, gave a lengthy interview to a national political publication in which he said, with the careful language of a man managing his own exposure, that he had raised concerns about Whitmore's approach to the charity-run situation and had ultimately withdrawn from the campaign when it became clear his advice was not being taken. The interview was widely read in political circles as a reminder that the first instinct of everyone adjacent to a scandal is to establish as quickly and publicly as possible that they had in fact seen the problem coming. Marcus read it and said nothing. Jim read it and said less. Garland Pruitt resigned from the sheriff's department on a Friday afternoon, which was the same Friday afternoon that the county board of supervisors voted to appoint him interim sheriff, pending a permanent election. The vote was 4-1. He accepted the appointment in a brief statement that was less than 200 words and contained no rhetoric and no promises, in just the plain language of a man who understood what the job was and intended to do it. The local paper ran his picture on the front page. He looked in the photograph like a man who had slept better in the past week than he had in the past year, which was approximately accurate. Marcus called him the day after the appointment was announced. "Congratulations," Marcus said. "Thank you," Garland said. "I want you to know something." "What?" "The department is going to cooperate fully with the federal investigation. Whatever they need, records, testimony, access, full cooperation." He paused. "I should have done more earlier. I want to be honest about that. The appointment doesn't erase what I was part of, and I'm not going to pretend it does." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "What you did at the line," he said, "on Highway 9, and the call to Kim before the cruiser was back in the lot." Another pause. "That matters." "Does it balance?" Garland asked. The question was direct and without self-pity, the question of a man who is genuinely asking because the answer matters to how he intends to move forward, not because he needs absolution. Marcus thought about it honestly. "No," he said, "not all the way, but it's not supposed to balance. It's supposed to move you in the right direction." Garland absorbed that. "Fair," he said. "Do the job well," Marcus said. "That's the answer to the question you're actually asking." "I intend to," Garland said, and meant it in a way that Marcus, who was good at knowing when people meant things, recognized as real. In Seattle, Lily Danvers was 3 weeks into a treatment protocol that the doctors at the research program had designed specifically around her case. The protocol involved a targeted immunological intervention that was not available anywhere outside of 2 research programs in the country, which was why the money had mattered so critically, because the program did not accept public insurance and the cost had not been negotiable. The response the lead physician told Carol in a phone call during the second week was better than projected. Significantly better. The early markers were encouraging in ways that warranted cautious but genuine optimism, which was the most positive thing the physician had said in any of their conversations, and Carol sat in the chair in their temporary apartment in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood for a long time after hanging up just sitting, letting herself feel cautious but genuine optimism for the first time in 8 months. Lily had opinions about Seattle. She expressed these opinions freely and frequently to Carol, to the nurses, to other children in the program's common area, and to the building's elevator in the form of commentary directed at it when it took too long. Her opinions included the Space Needle was too tall to see properly. From the ground, rain was acceptable but should not happen every day. The treatment room had a good chair, but the ceiling towels were boring and someone should put stickers on them. And Seattle coffee was very strong, which she knew because she had smelled Carol's cup every morning. The nursing staff found her delightful. The other children in the common area found her entertaining. Carol found her, as she had always found her, the organizing principle of everything. In the third week, Lily asked one of the nurses, a young woman named Brianna, who had taken a particular interest in Lily's opinions about ceiling tiles, whether she could use the common room computer to send an email. "Sure," Brianna said. "Who are you emailing?" "The motorcycle men," Lily said as if this were obvious. Brianna helped her compose the email, which took 45 minutes because Lily had significant content to communicate and needed considerable assistance with the spelling. The final email was sent to the chapter's contact address on the Angels Run fundraiser page, and it said in full, "Dear motorcycle men, Thank you for helping me. I am in Seattle now and the doctors are nice. They do not have stickers, but Brianna said she will bring some. The food here is okay. I asked Mom if I can ride a motorcycle when I am bigger, and she said, ask the motorcycle men. Can I? Also, I like your vests. Love Lily Danvers, age 6. Marcus received the email and forwarded it to Jim without comment. Jim read it at the workbench. He read it twice. Then he typed a reply which took him considerably longer than it should have, because typing was not a skill he had developed with particular focus, that said, Lily, we are very glad you are getting better. Yes, you can ride a motorcycle when you are bigger. We will be here. Big Jim. He sent it and went back to work. But for the rest of that afternoon, he moved with a lightness that Dice and Roadblock and the other members who were in and out of the clubhouse that day noticed and didn't comment on, because it was the kind of thing you notice and let be without naming. The formal charges against Whitmore were filed in federal court 6 weeks after his surrender. They ran to 23 pages and covered 4 counts of RICO conspiracy, 2 counts of money laundering, 1 count of obstruction of a federal court order, 3 counts of abuse of official capacity, and 1 count of conspiracy to deprive civil rights, the last charge arising specifically from the SWAT raid and the fabricated warrant. The civil rights charge had been Marcus's idea, or rather it had been the implication of something Marcus had included in his submission to Kim, and the prosecutor had picked it up and run with it. Gerald Cross Whitmore's attorney entered a not guilty plea on all counts at the arraignment, which was standard and expected. What was less standard was the press conference Whitmore gave afterward, brief, controlled on the courthouse steps, with Cross at his elbow, in which he said in a voice that had lost most of the performance register it had carried for 3 years, I intend to cooperate fully with the legal process, and I ask for privacy for my family during this time. It was the first statement he had made in 6 weeks that did not contain a political calculation. Darcy Cho, who covered the arraignment for the paper, noted this in her piece without editorializing, because the absence of editorializing was itself the editorial. She also noted in the same piece that the county's asset forfeiture audit had identified $1.1 million in assets that had been improperly processed through the shell company network, which was on the higher end of Marcus's original estimate, a detail she included because accuracy mattered and because Marcus had been right. Marcus read the piece and allowed himself one quiet moment of satisfaction at that specific detail. Then he closed the browser and went back to the chapter's ongoing tax documentation, which needed to be filed by the end of the month and was not going to file itself. The surplus from the Angels Run, $62,440 above Lily's treatment cost, had been sitting in the charity account since the night of the run, while Jim and Marcus in the chapter discussed what to do with it. The discussion had taken 3 meetings and a considerable amount of back and forth, because Jim was serious about this and did not want to decide it carelessly. The decision they reached was this: they would establish a standing medical charity fund under the chapter's registered nonprofit umbrella, specifically designated for emergency medical costs for families in Oak Haven County and the surrounding region who could not afford treatment. The Angels Run would become an annual event. The surplus from this year's run would seed the new fund. Jim announced it at the monthly chapter meeting on a Wednesday night, standing at the head of the long table with 23 members around him and the postcard from Lily on the wall to his right. We didn't plan this, he said. None of it, the run, the federal case, any of it. We planned a charity event for a child. Everything else came out of doing the right thing and refusing to stop doing it when someone told us to. He looked around the table. I want this to be the standard going forward. Not the federal case part that was circumstance, the showing up part, the refusing to accept that a child doesn't matter part. He paused. That's who we are. That's what we do next. Nobody said anything dramatic. They voted unanimously to establish the fund. They voted unanimously to make the Angels Run an annual event. They voted unanimously, and this was Dice's motion, which Jim had not expected, to name the medical fund the Lily Danvers Fund, with the understanding that Carol would be asked for her permission and Lily would be asked for hers, because a fund named after a 6-year-old required that 6-year-old's input. When Carol was asked, she cried quietly for a moment on the phone and then said yes. When Lily was asked via email with Brianna's assistance, she replied within 2 hours, yes, but can the picture of me be a good one, not the one where I have the wrong socks on? Marcus framed the response and put it on the wall of his office next to his paralegal commendation from 2009, because he felt both documents were equally representative of his career. 8 weeks after leaving Oak Haven, Carol and Lily came home. They came back on a Tuesday on the 2 o'clock flight, which landed at the regional airport 40 miles from town. And Carol had told almost no one she was not a woman who organized receptions or planned arrivals. She was a woman who just came home and got on with it. She had told Marisol because Marisol had been watering her plants for 2 months and deserved to know the timeline. She had told Jim because Jim had asked. So when they came out of the arrivals terminal with 2 suitcases and Lily's backpack, shaped like a frog, and the quiet, exhausted relief of people who have been away from their ordinary life for long enough to miss it, the presence of 23 motorcycles idling in the parking area was not something Carol had planned for. She stopped. Lily did not stop. Lily walked forward 3 steps and then stood looking at the motorcycles with the wide-eyed comprehension of someone verifying that a thing they had been told about is real. Jim was standing at the front of the formation. He walked toward them when he saw Carol stop, and he stopped in front of her and looked at her, and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "You knew we were coming today," Carol said. "You told me," he said. "I told you the flight number. I didn't say—" She stopped, looked at the 23 bikes, looked back at him. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," he said. Lily had closed the remaining distance to the nearest motorcycle, Richie's, the one she had sat on at the fairgrounds, and was standing beside it looking at Richie with the frank, assessing directness she applied to most things. "You fixed it," she said, looking at the bodywork. "It was broken before." "It was," Richie confirmed gravely. "It looks good now," she said. "Thank you," he said. And this enormous man, former Marine 9-year chapter member, stood very straight and received the compliment from a 6-year-old with the solemnity it deserved. Carol looked at Jim. "She's in remission," she said, and her voice on those words was something he would carry for a long time, the specific quality of 3 syllables that carry 8 months of fear and 2 months of treatment and a lifetime of love for one 41-pound person. "The doctors said the early markers are, they said it's working. They said it's really working." "I know," Jim said. "How do you know?" "Brianna told Marcus," he said. "Marcus told me." Carol blinked. "Brianna, the nurse." "She has Marcus's email," Jim said. "She's been keeping us updated." Carol stared at him for a moment. Then she made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something that needed a minute to settle. "She has Marcus's email," she repeated. "She said she wanted the people who made it possible to know how it was going," Jim said. Carol shook her head slowly, not in disbelief, in the particular way of someone absorbing the full shape of a thing they had only been seeing parts of. She had known about the 441 riders and the blocked highway and the federal case and the fund being named after her daughter. She had not known about Brianna the nurse and Marcus's email and the quiet ongoing act of keeping people informed the same way she had not known about Garland's call to Kim before the cruiser was back in the lot, or the anonymous wire transfer of $25,000 from the Nevada P.O. box, or any of the 100 small things that had moved in the background of this story, while the visible parts were the ones that made the news. "How many people," Carol said quietly, not quite a question, "have been paying attention to my daughter?" Jim considered it. "More than you know," he said. "Less than she deserves," he paused. "But we're working on the gap." Carol looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at her daughter, who had now climbed with Richie's assistance into the actual seat of the motorcycle and was sitting there with the expression of someone who has arrived at a destination they have been traveling toward for a while. "Mom," Lily called. "Mom, look." "I see you, baby," Carol called back. "Take a picture," Lily said. Carol took out her phone and took the picture, Lily on Richie's motorcycle, sitting straight-backed and serious in the leather seat with her frog backpack still on 22 other bikes arranged behind her, the afternoon light doing something unremarkable and beautiful. She looked at the picture for a moment. Then she put her phone in her pocket and picked up her suitcase and looked at Jim. "Let's go home," she said. What came after was the ordinary miracle of things continuing. Lily's remission held through the following month, and then the month after that, and the physicians in Seattle sent Carol written updates every 2 weeks that grew incrementally more confident in their language, from encouraging to positive to, in the 4th month's report, a phrase Carol read 3 times and then read aloud to Marisol in the diner's kitchen at 7 in the morning: "Sustained remission, consistent with full recovery trajectory." Marisol put down the spatula she was holding and sat on the step stool in the kitchen corner and said, "Thank God," in a voice so quiet and so complete that it was less a statement than a release of something she had been holding for a very long time. Lily went back to school in the fall. She was in second grade now, taught by a woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had read the story in the news, and who greeted Lily on the first day with the careful normalcy of an experienced teacher who understands that children who have been through large things need more than anything to be treated as though the large thing does not define them. Lily did not need much help with that. She arrived at second grade with the same matter-of-fact directness she brought to everything, decorated her desk with a small photograph of herself on Richie's motorcycle, and within 2 weeks had strong opinions about the classroom's hamster's name, which she felt should be changed from Mr. Whiskers to something more dignified in the seating arrangement near the window, which she felt was suboptimal. She was, in other words, entirely herself, which was the best possible outcome. The Angels Run held its second annual event in the spring of the following year. The permit was filed without incident and approved within 48 hours by the county office, now operating under procedures that Garland had rewritten to eliminate the discretionary ambiguities that Whitmore had exploited. The event drew 612 riders, 171 more than the first year, because word had spread in the way that good stories spread, not through advertising, but through telling. Sandra Reeves brought 2 full buses of riders from the Bay Area. Gear Hoffman brought 43 from Bakersfield. The Vietnam veteran from San Diego came back this time with 11 other Veterans Organization members who had heard his account of the first run and wanted to be part of the second. The Lily Danvers Fund raised $408,000 at the second Angels Run, which went into the Medical Emergency Fund and was dispersed over the following year to 7 families in the county who could not afford treatment for conditions that were going to kill them without help. 7 families, 14 adults, 9 children. Jim kept track of each one, not publicly, not in a way that sought recognition, but in a private ledger he maintained in the drawer of his workbench, because these were names that deserved to be written down somewhere by someone who understood what it had cost to build the thing that was now helping them. Blake Whitmore's trial began in the fall, approximately 14 months after his surrender on the fairgrounds grass. It lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution called 22 witnesses, including Garland Pruitt, whose testimony lasted 2 days, and was described by the legal press as damaging and comprehensive, and Marcus Webb, whose 4 hours on the stand presenting the financial documentation he had assembled, was described by the federal prosecutor as the clearest and most organized expert witness presentation she had seen in her career. Marcus wore his good suit and his reading glasses and testified in the flat, precise voice of a man who had spent 16 years learning how to present information accurately and without embellishment. He was not nervous because he had been telling the truth from the beginning, and truth does not require preparation beyond knowing it well. On cross-examination, Whitmore's defense attorney asked him, "Mr. Webb, isn't it true that you began this investigation with a predetermined conclusion that you were looking for evidence against my client rather than following the evidence wherever it led?" Marcus looked at him over the reading glasses. "No," he said. "Can you explain why not?" "Because I started with a charity permit application," Marcus said. "I was looking for whatever was there. What was there was what I found." He paused. "If there had been nothing there, I would have found nothing." The defense attorney moved on. There was not much more he could do with Marcus, which he had probably known before he started. The jury returned a verdict of guilty on 19 of 23 counts after 4 days of deliberation. The 4 counts on which they did not convict were the less significant ones, administrative technicalities, that the federal prosecutor had included for completeness, but had not prioritized. Whitmore sat at the defense table and heard the verdict with the stillness of a man who had known what was coming and had made what peace he could with it. He was sentenced 6 weeks later to 11 years in federal prison. He was 42 years old. His wife had separated from him 3 months after his arrest. His oldest daughter, the one he had called on the morning he went to the fairgrounds, who had told him she was glad he was turning himself in, attended the sentencing hearing, and sat in the back of the courtroom and did not approach him afterward. His younger daughter did not attend. Darcy Cho covered the sentencing for the paper. She wrote it straight and without editorial, which was the only way she knew how to write anything, and she filed it the same evening and went home and slept 12 hours straight because it was the end of 18 months of work and her body had been waiting for the signal to stand down. She won 2 journalism awards for the Angels Run coverage in the following year. She accepted both awards with brief remarks that credited the public records system, the willingness of sources to come forward, and what she described as The unusual circumstance of having a very good story walk into my newsroom in the form of a permit application dispute. She did not name Marcus or Garland in her acceptance speeches because they had asked her not to, and she honored that because honoring sources was not something she negotiated on. Jim heard about the awards from Dice, who had seen it in his feed. He said good and went back to what he was doing. The rebuilt clubhouse on Route 7 acquired new things in the months and years that followed. The postcard from Lily stayed on the wall above the symbol purple crayon, still legible, Seattle waterfront still visible. Beside it, at some point, someone pinned a printed photograph. Carol had sent it to the chapter's contact address of Lily. In her second-grade classroom, gap-toothed smile, the small photograph of herself on Richie's motorcycle visible in the background on her desk. Beside that, someone added a laminated copy of Darcy Cho's original article. The first one, the one that had started the national coverage, because it was the moment the story had broken its local container and become something larger. And beside that, eventually, a handwritten note in Lily's evolving handwriting, bigger now, more controlled, but still recognizably hers, that said, "Thank you for showing up. I am going to be a doctor when I grow up, or maybe a motorcycle person. Love, Lily, age 7. Jim read that note the morning it arrived and stood in front of the wall for a long time. He was 54 years old. He had been doing this for 15 years. He had buried 2 friends and raised 2 daughters and served 4 years in the Army and come back to a town that had needed more than he'd known how to give for most of his adult life. He had 47 red tacks on a map and a postcard in purple crayon and a medical fund with 7 families' names in a private ledger in his workbench drawer. He thought about what he would say if someone asked him what the lesson of it was, what the point of it had been. What, after everything, the permit and the revocation and the blockade and the fall and the run and the surrender and the trial and the fund and the 7 families and Lily in second grade with the photograph on her desk, what the whole thing meant. He looked at the wall, at the postcard and the photograph and the article, and the note from a 7-year-old who had decided she was going to be a doctor or maybe a motorcycle person. He thought he probably wouldn't say anything because he was not a man who summarized things out loud when the things themselves had already said what needed saying. But if he had to, if someone pushed, if Dice or Marcus or Sandra or Gear or Richie or any one of the 441 asked him, "What was this, Jim? What did we actually do here?" He thought he would say what he had said to Lily's mother on a quiet afternoon at a diner counter before any of it had resolved, when all he had was the intention and the refusal to accept the alternative. He would say, "Someone told us about a child who needed help, and we decided it mattered." That was the whole story. Everything else, the legal filings and the federal investigation and the corrupt sheriff and the blocked highway and the votes and the verdicts, all of it was just what happened when people refused to be told that a child's life was less important than someone else's ambition. All of it was just what showed up when you decided something mattered and acted accordingly and kept acting when the acting became hard. Garland Pruitt was elected sheriff in the permanent election that spring, running unopposed, which was itself a statement about what Oak Haven County had decided it wanted from the person in that job. He served with the particular thoroughness of a man who understood that his tenure was an ongoing act of repair and did not treat that understanding as a burden but as a direction. Marcus Webb eventually went back to work as a paralegal, not for the chapter but for a nonprofit legal organization in Sacramento that provided free services to low-income clients in civil matters. He commuted 3 days a week and spent the other 2 at the chapter keeping the books and the legal filings and the charity fund administration in the meticulous order that was his natural mode of being. He was by any measure doing more good than at any other point in his career, which he would not say out loud, but which he thought about sometimes on the commute home. Richie Torres repainted his motorcycle that winter. The paint job he chose was simple, the deep black he'd always run, but on the left side of the tank, he had a local artist add one small detail, a yellow flower, the same yellow as Lily's dress on the day of the run. Nobody asked him about it. He didn't explain it. It was just there on every ride, and that was enough. Sandra Reeves drove down from the Bay Area for the second Angels run and for everyone after it, and she brought more riders each time. And at the third year's event, she told Jim and she thought the run could grow to 1,000 riders if they wanted it to. And Jim said, "Let's see what the road holds," which was his way of saying yes without making a promise that depended on more than his own intention. Carol Danvers stopped working doubles as much. Not because the diner had gotten easier, but because the online fundraiser that Marcus had set up as a backup during the permit crisis had never quite been taken down. And in the months after the run, it continued to receive small donations from people who had read the story and wanted to do something, and found that sending $20 to a woman who had fought for her daughter felt like the right something to do. She eventually enrolled in an online nursing program, not because of the money exactly, but because something about the past year had clarified for her what she wanted her days to be for, and she thought the clarified version looked like helping people through the specific geography of fear that she now knew well from the inside. She graduated 3 years later. The chapter threw a party at the clubhouse on Route 7, which Lily attended in a dress that was not yellow this time but green, and which she deemed acceptable after some deliberation. Jim danced at that party, which surprised everyone, including himself. And Lily grew. She grew the way children grow, when the thing that was threatening to stop them stops threatening, and the ordinary forward motion of a life takes over quickly, unevenly, in fits and starts of new heights, in new opinions, in new certainties about what she thought and what she wanted and who she was. She grew taller than the doctor's early projections, which her physician mentioned at a checkup, with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose cautious optimism has been exceeded. She stayed curious about motorcycles. Carol kept that door open the way she had promised, and Jim kept the offer open the way he had promised. And when Lily was 12, she came to the clubhouse on a Saturday morning, and Richie Torres, with the solemnity he applied to all important things, taught her how to sit on a bike, how to hold the grips, how to feel the weight of it, how to understand what it meant to be responsible for something that powerful. She listened with complete attention. She asked 3 questions, each one specific and sensible. She sat on the bike for 20 minutes without it running, just feeling it, and then she got off and said, "Okay, I understand now." "What do you understand?" Richie asked. "Why it matters," Lily said. "Why you care about it." Richie looked at her for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "that's the right thing to understand first." Jim was leaning against the doorframe watching. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. This was not a story about a motorcycle club or a corrupt sheriff or a federal investigation or a charity run. Though it was all of those things, it was a story about what happens when someone decides that a life matters and refuses to be argued out of it, and what that refusal builds when it meets other people who have made the same decision, and how the thing they build together is always larger than any one of them could have managed alone. And how it keeps building even after the emergency that started. It has been resolved because the impulse behind it was never really about the emergency. It was about the kind of people they were choosing to be. And in Oak Haven, California, in a clubhouse on Route 7, with a postcard in purple crayon on the wall, and a private ledger with 7 families' names in a workbench drawer, and a small yellow flower on a motorcycle tank, and a medical fund that had just helped its 11th family get through something they couldn't have gotten through without help. The answer to that question had been settled as clearly as anything gets settled in the complicated and imperfect world that human beings actually inhabit. Some people, when a child needs saving, look away. And some people, the ones this story was always about, ride toward it. That has always been the difference. And in Oak Haven, the difference held.